So one of the most difficult things that people go through in their life is when their integrity is questioned, when an opportunity or an unfortunate circumstance presents itself on whether or not people are going to crumble or they're going to stand tall for what they believe in. My guest today is one of those people. And when you get to learn more about Rick and his story, you're going to understand why he thinks the way he does, and the reason why he stood up for what he did in terms of the corruption that was taking place at Florida Tech. But what I really want you to listen to is I want you to listen to the breadth of knowledge that he has in terms of understanding how human beings function, what drives them from a neuroscience perspective, as well as what drives people to do certain things psychologically. So without further ado, Rick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Obviously the easiest place to start would be to just, give us a quick synopsis of what took place at Florida Tech and how you got to the position you're in right now.
Sure. So for the past 5 years, I've been a faculty member at, at Florida Institute of Technology. I've been a tenured professor of psychology. I'm a neuroscientist and also affiliated in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. And so for the past 5 years, I've been there teaching, conducting research, winning NIH awards and grants, publishing discoveries of the human brain, behavior, all that kind of good stuff. And through the course of events, I was basically made aware of the intention of our president and a cabal of related faculty members to conspire to defraud the citizens and the governor of the state of Florida, as well as the federal government, by virtue of non-compliance with federal and state directives for receiving state and federal funds to the tune of first $7 million, specifically for a grant that had been essentially stipulated by Governor Ron DeSantis, and then from the Federal Department of Education by virtue of federal student loans. And I say that because that's what I was told by the president of the university. And he came to a meeting after a first initial meeting, told us he was going to come to a meeting and tell us these things of how he was going to fight back against the government in order to continue to do the prohibited activities of DEI and critical race theory teaching and implementation in order to continue to receive the state and federal funds. And then he came and he did it. And I reported that. We blew the whistle on that. And at that point, there was a handful of things that happened, but ultimately I was terminated unannounced without any due process, any notification from a tenured position. That was probably about 6 weeks ago. Left my family high and dry without medical insurance for my kids, salary, income, whatever. And there's a whole lot to unpack there, but the gist of it was I caught the president of the Florida Institute of Technology coming to our meeting telling us that he had a meeting at the governor's office of the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis, was shaken down by the governor and said, "Why are you so woke?" He said, "I didn't say anything, committed sin of omission, went home and said, why don't we fight back?" And he came to our meeting to tell us how he was going to fight back. And we're here in Florida, so this is fighting back against your tax money to get a $7 million grant. But then he went on to say, so the $7 million grant was the first story that came out from James O'Keefe and O'Keefe Media Group. They broke that in early April. But what we followed up with in subsequent stories from O'Keefe Media Group was that I basically found that it was way more than that, because the president went on to say, this is more than $7 million. He says, I don't mind losing it. If I lose it, we lose it. What I'm worried about losing is this federal student funding, which his vice president published in the student paper the next day was $69 million. Federal
that's massive, right?
And that's why, right? we can handle $7 million somehow.
Right.
But I don't want to lose $69 million because the vice president published in the student newspaper said that'll shut our doors.
Wow.
And so that's what we were told. And, what do you do when you're, the unintending recipient of information of that magnitude and navigate conscience?
I don't think you can. And I mean, obviously it hits you to a point where you recognize this isn't right. And I think the thing that pops into my mind is, why did you think it wasn't right? What about the programs that they were trying to protect did you have a problem with? Like, I understand if it's a directive and you seem like an individual, we had a chat prior to coming on that, you go by the letter of the law, like this, if these are the rules, I'm going to follow the rules. And you identified that those rules had changed and now you were saying this is not correct. And on top of them trying to pay you off, which is another, we'll get into that in a second. But you recognize, hey, this is not okay. But what about those rules? What specifically about those ideologies? Because I think that's fundamentally what's the argument. And this is happening obviously at institutions all across the country and around the world, right? There's this DEI initiative, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and which is rooted in critical theory, critical race theory. So what about that is problematic for you?
That's a really good question. I'll try to answer it in 3 different layers. Mm-hmm. First, I would say you're right in that DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's
Can I one time just hop in? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
And just, can you describe what your PhDs are? So, because I want people to understand you're not just winging this from your back hip, man. Like this is, you are an expert in psychology and neuroscience.
Well, as it happens, I'm also an expert in diversity as well. I was actually a diversity fellow of the American Psychological Association's diversity program in neuroscience during my doctoral dissertation at UC Davis in the neuroscience PhD program. So my neuroscience degree was earned as a PhD at UC Davis. I was a Young Alum Award winner at UC Davis, an undergraduate degree in psychology from the College of New Jersey. I did a first PhD program down here in Boca at Florida Atlantic University Center for Complex Systems and Brain Science before transferring over to UC Davis. I did a 3-year postdoctoral fellowship in neuroimaging at University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, and then was a faculty member at UT Dallas and School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences. And then I've been
So there aren't many people out there that understand how the human mind works from a neurological level, biological level, psychological level. You think you've got that pretty well covered, huh?
Reasonably so. I'd say that there are absolutely people, like, one of the things I always enjoyed about that journey in the world of neuroscience was I will promise you that I was and always loved being the absolute dumbest guy in the room. Don't get me wrong. There are brilliant, much smarter people than I out there. I think I was.
Well, as he told me before he comes, because he's also a phenomenal collegiate wrestler as well too. He said, "I'm really just a knuckle dragging wrestler who got a couple degrees." That's how he described it. So.
Yeah, although I would say I definitely did not say phenomenal.
Yes, I threw that in there. Sorry.
So this will be a slight tangent to answering your question about DEI and my neuroscience credentials, but just for point of full clarity, I was a walk-on Division III wrestler, which means if Division III is the bottom of Division 1, 2, 3, and JV is the bottom of that, and the walk-on is beneath that, I was that guy.
Okay.
So I was the walk-on, and I took great pride, though, as a walk-on college wrestler at one of the top programs in the country, that after 4 years, I was the only one in my entire freshman class of blue chip recruits left standing who actually completed 4 years and never quit.
So you can call it the bottom of the bottom of the bottom, but that's not the way I see it.
I was hit by a car in the middle of that. I was running over at 50 miles an hour, and I still finished 4 years straight. And some of those guys, injuries happen. Sure. I'm not, it's not because they were just, some guys quit. They're just quitters. But other guys, I mean, things come up. You take a red shirt year.
It happens.
I was the only guy left standing. And so, I know you come from a strong background of never quitting and persevering through things like buds. That kind of an ethos is what I brought to the neuroscience field.
And I think that's why you're able to keep going in the way you are, because you learn that on the mats, and you don't learn that anywhere else. I really believe that any combatives, in particular wrestling or jiu-jitsu, you just learn so much about yourself. And maybe after we get through all this other stuff, I want to spend some time and your thoughts on performance and what that never quit mindset is like, if you're okay with that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, great.
I mean, and I think that there's an indispensable element of you learn about suffering and how to suffer.
That's right.
In both of our walks of life.
That's right.
And when you learn that sort of cheat code to the game,
anything's possible.
Okay.
All right. So we've established you know what you're talking about when it comes to the human mind. So let's talk about then DEI, critical race theory, back it all the way even critical theory.
Yeah. So the answer to your question I was getting at was that you said that DEI is rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would push back and contend that it's rooted in discrimination. It's rooted in exclusion, and it's rooted in a fundamental pattern that we see in effectively communists to control. They want to exclude people. They want to define them by how they're different, and they want to prioritize one group of people over another. They use that policy, whether it's DEI or Title IX or any kind of element that it brushes up against, as a cudgel to control us, to control you. They want to control you. They want to control what you do, but they can't do that without controlling what you say and what you think. And that's ultimately how it's manifested. That's how I've seen it manifested on campuses across the country. And it's part of
from California, New Jersey, California, Texas, and Florida. So you've been how many in Florida? 2 in Florida. So you've been at 5 major universities.
Yeah. And across the span of like what you might think of as like demographics, I've gone from public liberal arts colleges in New Jersey to the biggest, broadest education system there is, which is Cal State, which is, I think, 400 or 500,000 students system wide. I was a tenured track professor there, was director of a neuroscience lab, and to the University of Texas, which is right there as like one of the biggest systems in the country, but that's a little bit different profile than the Cal State system. And now I've been at a private technical school in Florida as well. So this is a universal kind of like pattern that we see, which is this systemic use of things like Title IX and DEI as a weaponization. And so one of the things that have been popular in the news has been weaponization of government. And I'm glad to see that that's being addressed at the tip of the spear, the highest political levels, because the government was weaponized against presidents and his cabinet and other people like that. But one of the things that, I always like to send as a message to the administration pursuing the correction of those weaponizations is the reminder that all the regular citizens are subjected to this weaponization too. This cudgel of discrimination and exclusion, that hurts everyday Joe. That hurts everybody at every no-name like regional state school. That the weaponization of government has to be investigated or should be against the regular people who comprise the government of the people.
I firmly agree. I mean, there's endless stories about very high performing kids. And I'm not just talking about white kids, it's Asian kids. It's all different types of kids that through the coveted idea of meritocracy, they believe that if they work as hard as humanly possible, they're going to get the opportunity to challenge, right? To get in the arena, so to speak. And how soon did you start seeing this? Like, how far back does this go in your mind?
Anecdotally, I felt it as a student, applying to colleges, applying to graduate schools, applying for fellowships and scholarships. I went to public school in New Jersey. I paid my way through school, 100% financed on my own, between cash, working as a landscaper and a bar back and a bouncer. I basically literally landscaping by day and bar fighting at night.
Wow.
Paid cash, took loans for the rest of it. It took me 25 years to pay off those loans by virtue of support from the National Institute of Health grants I received. But, I felt like, and I'm sure that this is something that has resonated with a lot of people, that no matter how hard you work, like it still seemed boxed out along that journey. I would sit in classes at Princeton for 5 years, learning all sorts of things from their visiting speakers and college wrestler. I was a finalist for the Rhodes Scholarship in New Jersey in 2004. I actually got interviewed by Cory Booker for it. But yeah, he was the mayor in Newark at the time.
Right.
And, so no matter what we were doing, even at that point, so people need to unpack and the idea that's very fresh. The last 15 months or so, affirmative action was deemed illegal. But for generations beforehand, that was the law of the land. People thought it wasn't just good, but it was merited and, like proper. And so you're always essentially racing against quotas.
Mm-hmm. Is there a component to the initial construct of the idea that underprivileged, what are they called? Underprivileged, underserved, serviced minorities in areas, in particular academic, right? That there really is an unfair system in place. Is there truth to that at all?
Yes, if you consider the promotion of any one race over another to be unfair. Mm-hmm. And I think, I wasn't alive in previous eras,
right?
But I'm very easily convinced. I have no doubt that they absolutely were subjected to discrimination. Right. And I think discrimination's wrong, but I think discrimination of anyone is wrong. And that's part of the answer to your question of what's wrong with DEI. It discriminates. And this isn't from me, by the way. This is coming from executive orders from the White House, the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights, and the United States Supreme Court, which has said it is wrong to do this and to discriminate upon anyone. Racism is not a cure for racism. Right. It's not the fix. It's the problem. And so that's one of the problems that's wrong with it. And I grew up on public housing in Chicago. We had $1 a month rent. My mom was a single mom, and then I switched. I lived with a single dad. Like we came from poorness.
Right.
We were on food stamps. We were on government services, and there is a really a valuable place, I think, for supporting people from underserved backgrounds. Mm-hmm. But, that doesn't mean that the manifestation of how these policies have emerged is correct, because it's not. And that's not me saying that. That's the Office of Civil Rights from the Department of Justice.
100%. Yeah.
And anybody who's, had a sniff of culture over the last stretch of years has seen how this has gone awry. Right. It's been used incorrectly. I've personally seen it on campus, weaponized in many different ways. I've had students complain that I address a room full of women as ladies. Hey, ladies, are you ready for class today? Majority of women in class. They say that's gender stereotypes.
Right.
You can't control someone's speech to that extent while earlier telling me I shouldn't say you guys, which is the standard plural way of addressing
right.
that.
You said that too on your interview with James too, is that you talked about the guys commentary as well too.
Absurd.
When you were first entering academia, did you hear the language first before the policy kind of laid down? When in your mind was the real shift where they had been testing the waters, right? You date back when I was in college in the early 90s, right? And it was political correctness, right? And that was the emergence of it. That's where it felt like academia, in particular, probably sociologists, right? And that whole department in the humanities were started to, pull at the edges of what was feasible or possible with this critical theory stuff.
Yeah, I think like anything, like slowly and then all at once.
Yeah.
So, I started college in the year 2000.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I would say, and we talked about this briefly off air, but I think it's a applicable answer of an analogy of when did I start to see that. So after 9/11, I was in Jersey. We had students at my university lose their parents.
Oh, wow.
Like they grew up across the river. They
Right.
worked at the World Trade Center. And I was there that Saturday, the 15th thereafter, helping as a relief worker. And so,
and you talked a little bit about, just explain that a little bit so you can bring people to what that was like in that moment.
it was a very challenging. So if you remember that time, nobody knew really what was happening. So the World Trade Center was attacked on a Tuesday, and I was there that Saturday. I think it was the 15th, and it was locked down by the Marines for the most part. Like nobody really knew who hit us yet. And so we didn't really know what was happening. It was essentially a militarized environment.
Right.
And obviously there's bodies still alive as well. People were still survived under the rubble.
Right.
And we, some guys that I lived with and worked with, set up a bus to go up there and try to help. Now it was boxed off, but somebody's mom worked for the Red Cross and she thought we could get in. So we basically made fake IDs of the Red Cross, snuck in past the Marine line, walked down Canal Street, and did whatever we could in a small way to help and really just try to support the firefighters and the people there who hadn't slept in 3 days.
Wow.
And you could see like people's fingers written, like the writing on the windows of ash.
Oh my gosh.
Of like RIP of their friend.
Oh my gosh.
The firefighters.
Yeah.
And my brother's a firefighter now outside of Austin. And I told him that when he was in training and stuff. And
wow.
Like it was hard to see that. And we didn't feel like we'd give them water and food and try to help them. And you could, there at the rubble, you saw the site, but you smelled
the smell is what you had talked about.
Yeah. It's a very unique burn smell. It's not a good one. You don't want to smell it again. And
it's a smell you never forget. Yeah.
No. And so it was a very profound experience as a college kid at that age.
I bet.
We walked, and I was telling Jesse Barnett this the other day. They did that SEAL swim.
Yep.
Not too long ago. Was it last week?
Last week.
And they had a parade that they walked. And what happened then is nobody really talked about this at that time. I don't know why the news never really covered it, but there's a street that you take to go to the World Trade Center. It's called Canal Street. And it was blocked off for miles because it was an obvious ground zero site. But we walked, once we snuck past essentially the Marine guards, fake IDs on M16s and stuff.
Yeah.
We walked down that street. Now it's covered with tanks, or not tanks, big army trucks.
Yeah.
Might as well be tanks to us
civilians, right?
Like we don't know.
Anything, OD green is something that can kill you, right?
And with news trucks,
yeah.
But it's this boxed off lane for about a mile, and you walk there in surreal silence, but it wasn't exactly silent because the sides of the roads was packed with people cheering.
Wow.
Every single first responder that walked in or walked out, and that we were stunned. It was a very somber moment, and we didn't expect that at all. The news never talked about that. I've never seen it really featured in all that time, but there were New York citizens who 24 hours a day through the middle of the night, they would cheer for every single person that walked in and out. And, and especially the walking out part, because when you're walking out and leaving there,
destroyed,
like the firefighters or the rescue workers or the police people who were searching for their friends, they were walking out either successful, which is not good,
right?
Because they found things they didn't really want to see and find. They hadn't slept for days, or they were walking out unsuccessful, which is also not
massive
what they wanted to have happen. They didn't find what they were looking for. And so to know that people were cheering for them that entire mile walk out, it wasn't right for us because we weren't those people. Like we didn't deserve that applause and support, but you also couldn't tell the people no.
Yeah.
So you had to.
Well, they're there for their own reason as well too, right? That It's the catharsis for them to support in any way they can. And I mean, what more rudimentary way to support another human being by demonstrating an overt approval, right?
Yeah,
an applause. Hey, good job, great job.
It gives me the chills just thinking about it, because it was so inappropriate for us, because we didn't do anything deserving of that, but you couldn't tell them not to.
Yeah.
So you had to just take it, which is a weird thing to say. You had to take this credit for something that we didn't really deserve.
Wow.
And but it was very profound. It was very inspiring of the human spirit.
I bet. Because
I took that away from it. Like, out of all that death and destruction, there was goodness, and there was goodness in people.
Yeah.
And I think that is very important to remember in dark times.
Well, I think it locks into us, right? And when you to go back to, what you've pursued so vigorously over your adult life in terms of understanding the impacts of that, where it comes from, why it's important, how it alters our brain chemistry, how it alters our cognition, how it enhances or, ingrains neural pathways. I mean, that's the root of everything that you ended up becoming an expert in. And I think, it's really interesting to me as you shared that with me, like, in my mind, it's like, wow, how does a person become so, I mean, maybe infatuated is probably too strong of a word for it, but I mean, it's certainly it's heavier than a focus, maybe not quite an obsession. It's that drive, right? That we keep talking about, that motivational drive, that trigger in us. I would imagine that experience was a profound push for you to really understand how we function and what enables us to either, endeavor to persevere within the 9/11 or what drives the creation of DEI. I mean, I would imagine that. And
I mean, I went home and I wanted to enlist. I was in my wrestling season. I was also jacked up. I had torn rotator cuffs and bad knee. Like every young man at that age, you wanted to enlist. But I also thought, strangely enough, at the time, like I was a little worried about like not knowing who it was that did this. And I'm like, oh, and I should say too, there was something like in one of the parks, like people just went missing.
Yeah.
There's like 3,000 people missing at Union Square. I have pictures from a yellow Polaroid, like disposable camera that day in Times Square, just missing posters everywhere. So it was like, it seemed like the rapture. Like people were just gone.
Yeah.
They were there one moment and gone the next. And I thought, and I mentioned this when a few moments ago when we were chatting, I'm like, I had grown up in public housing. I had a really, really bad, abusive childhood. I ran away when I was 16.
Wow.
Ended up in New Jersey. I had rebuilt to, get recruited at Princeton. Now I'm in college. I'm paying my way through. I'm like, I kind of wanted to finish like something in my life that I started.
Wow.
I'd never been at the same school that I started at. I always transferred. So I'm like, I really wanted to finish college. And I thought, as much as I want to enlist like September 16th or 12th, after each of those 2 days, I'm like, if we're starting a land war in Asia, I'm pretty sure it'll be there in 3 years when I'm done.
It certainly was.
And so it kept me out in that respect. But I mentioned it as, when did I start to see these things happening on campuses? Well, like months after that, in New Jersey, at our school where students had parents pass away, they were not allowing students to fly the American flag in their dorm room windows. And it was a big story at the time. And they played it off like, oh, it's a fire code thing. So we brought out the fire chief from Trenton. He's like, nah, that is not a fire code. You fly that flag.
Wow.
And the school did everything they could to wiggle their way out of it. I wrote an op-ed in the paper for the school.
Oh my gosh.
I sent it to Tilt Meyer, who was the editor afterwards when we were talking. I wrote an op-ed. I tweeted it a couple of days ago because they're having the same flag issue right now in England with the St. George flag.
That's right.
And so I started seeing this happen back then. We were deeply enmeshed. And of course, like on the college campuses at the time, there was a big, anti-war movement that emerged through that process too. Right. So you saw a lot of that kind of cultural buildup. But that was evident very
Anti-war
early.
protests were not unique, though. I mean,
No,
we've been having those for a long period. And you know, there is a component of that is fair. It's right. It's your freedom of speech. And when you are in a college environment, that's when that activism is kind of planted, right? But there's also a counter activism that can take place. Like, people should be able to be as patriotic as they want. They should be able to counteract the others, right? And that would be that's the equality of that type of ideological stance, right?
Well, and if you were, I don't know if you were in the service or civilian side at that time, but like that's.
Oh, I was in.
So at that time, certainly on campuses and in the civilian world, this is when things started to emerge, where part of that issue with the flag then on campus for the American flag was that you pulled it out of administrators. They finally started saying, well, it could be offensive to some people. At that point, the boogeyman was Islam or Muslims, right? Which right. You know, you want to be fair and whatnot. So people were starting to sow those seeds of saying that America is bad, our symbol of freedom is bad, which was, by the way, like flying over every bridge and roadside, and certainly in New Jersey at the time, across the
New York, Connecticut, the whole country. I mean, you drive. I mean, in California, which was already moving towards a much, I think, more rapid progressivism than anywhere else. Every single house, every single building, every single place. It was
inspiring.
That's right.
It brought people together in such a unique way because we are one. We're a country of countrymen together.
That's right.
And it was already starting to have people claw that apart. By saying that that's not a good symbol because it could offend somebody. And so that's when I started seeing things. And at the same time, you know, it's interesting that you asked that because I hadn't thought about it for probably 20 years. But during that time, in 2000 to 2005, when I was in school there were a rash of these things that ended up being these false cases of what they called hate crimes. Which was anathema to say back then.
Right.
But now it's 2025. We have an extraordinary documented record now of Josie Smollett. It's right. That was happening back then. And we were like 18, 19, 20.
The noose in NASCAR, the bubble walls.
We had it happen on my campus.
Really?
We had these things. We had teach-ins. Classes were canceled in 2002, 2003.
Wow.
For like people who claimed that they had swastikas written on their doors, people who claimed that they had some attacks for their sexuality or something. Mm-hmm. And it turns out in all of them, they were fake. All of them. Like they were like, and it's memory hold. People forget about that. But back then we saw it early enough. And that's when I started to see these things. And then, you know, if you think about, you know, again, like the cultural history of, say, affirmative action was built into the cultural psychological makeup and ethos as being valid, appropriate, proper, and legal. Mm-hmm. Up until just about a year ago, last summer. So people are wrestling with that, I think, psychologically, because they're like, this thing that we thought was right, how do you psychologically handle now thinking that that's wrong? And so I think we're seeing some cultural clashes on that too. But what we're seeing now in DEI manifestations on campus is like the 10x steroid version of that, where if affirmative action was Bud Light, this is Bud Heavy. Yeah. And what was gentle, so to speak, in affirmative action, called some quotas, trying to make sure people are balanced out, this and that people were kind of okay for a while managing. They're like, all right, what is manifesting on college campuses now for everyone's children, grandkids, and campuses, whatever, is not the protection of discrimination, but the providence of it. Right. And that's what that came about in about 2010, after the midterm elections. In 2010, they knew administratively that they had the goods and the political inertia to impose these draconian measures that no longer just protected people from discrimination, which is great. Right. Awesome. Right. I don't want you discriminated. I don't want my other friends discriminated. That's right. Who, you know, like, and I'm part Native American. Like they nobody's talking about that because those are not things that we want to happen. Right. But what this DEI stuff is doing now is actually giving a preference and saying, hold these people back and push these other people forward.
Right.
That's a whole new level of steroids, so to speak.
For sure.
At a policy level. And that's what's so problematic about them, because it's not about diversity. It's not about equity. It's not about inclusion. It's about hurting people by holding them back and preferring and pushing other people forward. That's essentially just communism. That's a mafia. That's however you want to conceptualize that. It's not American.
It's absolutely communism. And that's, I think, the real key is, like, you go back and you start researching critical theory, right? And how that emerged, where it came out of, and you take that back another step, and you're 4 steps away from communism, right? Through the academia, people escaping, communist places in, East Germany and all these, really areas where psychological development, the development of psychology, psychiatry, that type of thing that emerged, right, late 1880s in Europe, Vienna in particular. And as it metastasized through, those two kind of, socialistic ideas, they ended up coming over here and repopulating the universities. Now, I think it was able to keep in check for a long, long period of time, because I think for a multitude of reasons. One, the boards, weren't as corrupt as they ultimately became. The money wasn't as big as it used to be, and then I think probably in the 90s you had this, massive shift towards these. How do you get funding in? And did you notice it? And this is and we're kind of dancing around it in your career progression. When did you start to see that it was rooted in the administrative area and correlated to federal dollars? And so there was a direct correlation to promote it as instead of just ideologically. Well,
goodness. So I was, I think I applied for a National Science Foundation fellowship as a college student for the graduate research fellowship. I was an honorable mention for the grad program as an undergraduate. And even back then, and certainly in the time since, they required these diversity statements to be written. And they have now taken hold in the subsequent decade that followed or so. And now they're on retreat again, because people are realizing that that's what they were starting to do. It was kind of like compelling your speech to tell you, to say some sort of a statement about, like, why you're going to make sure that you have a commitment to social justice and diversity in order to get these funds.
Right.
And,
and that's grant money. That's that's everything. Right?
Yeah. It's for faculty jobs.
That's right. For your job.
Graduate school admissions. Wow. I was on the admissions committee for the PhD program at UC Davis.
Wow.
I've been on admissions committees all over the place.
Right.
That was a part of it too. And so it's kind of like, you're forcing people to do these. And I imagine in the military world, it's similar for officer promotions or other things, right? There are things that when you set the benchmarks, this is the tune that we're going to play. People figure out how to dance to the tune.
Yes,
because you have to.
If you want to advance.
So, like, those things were happening probably in parallel in those in those cultures. And, so I started seeing that happen through those times. I saw Title IX get weaponized in so many different ways. When I was a professor at UT Dallas, I had a student make a false claim and threat against me on Title IX in class. This is kind of a funny story. I was teaching a class and I get this email.
What was the class you were teaching?
Probably neurobiology or systems neuroscience or something.
Right. A science class. Right?
Oh yeah, straight up science.
Science class where theoretically there is no, discrimination in science, right?
No, this is the name was behavioral neuroscience. So I get this email after class, and there's 200 kids in the class. You get a lot of emails, and you love working with students. Like I'm a wrestling coach at heart and by trade, and that's why we do what we do. I love to teach, to coach, to mentor. Yeah. All the stuff that you champion and are a champion of yourself 100%. In so many good ways that I've benefited from listening and watching your stuff for so many years. And so the student sends me this email. It's like a night class. It's like 8:00 now, class is over. I get this email, and it was something to the tune of, she's like, I saw and heard what you said to me in class. I didn't know you felt that way. I feel the same way too. It's only harassment if I report you. Here's my number. And I looked like that. And I'm like, so I had just gotten engaged.
Mm-hmm.
My fiance had just left the country to start veterinary school in the island of Grenada, which we invaded in the 80s at that school at St. George University. Yep. So we had just gotten engaged. She had just gone to start that. And the first thing I did was I sent it to her. I'm like, you need to know that this just happened. Yes. You need to know it's not true.
Yeah.
And like, and you know, the funny part about it is, I tell this story to students a lot now. I send her a picture of the student.
Yeah.
So that she knew this was not a problem.
It was an impossibility.
Because she was a dog. Like it was like,
yeah.
Like it was so, and of
the
course,
motivation is, I mean, the fact that a student has the capacity for that setup is remarkable.
Well, and because she was taught that there was a weaponization of Title IX. She said
right.
It's only I mean, look, people come on to people all the time.
Right.
Okay, they're adults on college campuses. Sometimes it's not right, but the linchpin of the story is that this is an answer. This is why I say it as an answer to your question. When did I start to see this turn of the screw to a weaponization? Like, I'm a junior, first year professor or whatever it was, and she knows she has leverage over me by telling me it's only a problem if she reports me, and that she won't report me. She'll essentially extort me.
That's right.
To do what she wants me to do to her.
That's right.
And like,
I mean, the manipulation level in that is that's tier 1.
Yeah. And so, but she was given the institutional knowledge to know that was capable to hold people hostage to. Yeah. And so I immediately sent it off to the Title IX director. The university did their investigation. Like first thing I did is I sent it to my wife because, she's
what you do.
She's thinking, I've got this young fiance teaching classes with a bunch of college girls.
Right.
Like, I have to be very, very respectful and fair to her. So I send it to her. I show her the picture. I'm like, this is not a problem.
Yeah.
And it could become one.
For sure.
Different kind of problem.
Yeah.
They investigate that for a while. And I get a call from Title IX. And I should say, the student didn't know that I had been video recording my lectures in 2015. They were all on YouTube.
Everything.
This is like way before Zoom, way before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I was like innovating, teaching methods, to put classes online.
Right.
So the whole darn thing is on video.
And so
this is why I felt so comfortable. I was like,
I'm good.
Let's rock and roll. Let's
wow.
You want to threaten me with a good time?
Yeah.
Let's do this thing.
Yeah.
And so I send the video link to the Title IX. They have it on tape. They have the whole class on tape.
Wow.
It absolutely didn't happen. I never said anything to her. She's completely delusional.
Yep.
And weaponizing a system, Title IX.
What happened to the girl?
So Title IX office calls me. They say, well, we looked into this. We interviewed the girl. Melissa was her name. And they said, and after 45 minutes, we're pretty convinced that you didn't do what she said you did.
Pretty convinced.
Yeah. And I'm like, it took you 45 minutes? They said, well, we asked her in every way we knew just to make sure. I'm like, hold on here. I reported it as a victim. You turned this thing against me anyways?
That's right.
And they did.
Of course.
Thank heavens for that video recording.
I don't know why anybody that's in any position where they have an exchange of, what do they call it when there's a natural imbalance of power or whatever they call it. There's a technical term for it. I can't think of it right now, but anything where the power disbursement is profound, right? Mostly teacher to student, right? That's where it's the manipulation, or boss to junior employee, right? That type of malfeasance, or what is it? It's we call it in the military. If an officer is manipulating a junior soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, I forget what it was called. I'm just brain dead right now. Sorry. But that reality, right, is that power distribution. And then all of a sudden they know that. People get that. And so you're experiencing, what year is that? 2015?
Approximately, yeah.
So that's like, you're seeing it. And my point of all this, and I know the audience, if you're going, where the hell's Rut going? And I do have a tendency to go down rabbit hole. I'm laying a predicate so that you understand that Rick just did not wake up one day and say, you know what, to hell with all this. I'm sick of it. I'm going to fight back against this.
This wasn't a suicide mission.
No, at all. This was a buildup, and the tolerance that you've had of it and trying to pursue your dream of being the best professor, coach, teacher you could be has really been the predominant idea. And the idea, you think, within this world of academia is that type of initiative, that type of integrity, that type of what is it? It's calibration, right? Because at any minute we can deviate. I mean, that's
what was happening at that time too. There was a fake rape cases emerging at University of Virginia with Jackie Coakley.
Oh my gosh,
that was happening at the same time.
Yep.
So culture was starting
to emerge. The Duke lacrosse
That was when I was in school.
Right.
So that was happening in that earlier era. So you see these steps, and it's growing and growing. But every single one of these things are generally found out to be a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't change course. They keep being allowed to happen. And so to answer your question, what did they do to her? So they're telling me on the phone, they're like, well, fine. She admitted she made it up. I'm like, yeah, I know. And they're like, she's crying. She's really sorry about it. I'm like, boo-hoo. They're like, do you think you can let her back in class? I think, no, I can't be subjected to that professional risk again.
Right.
Like, absolutely flipping out. Well, there's another guy who teaches a class. Do you think she could just attend his lectures? Nope. We teach in different ways, different chapters, absolute. They did everything they could organizationally to who they now have proven is a victim. Me, I was victimized by false allegations.
Yep.
And the threat of weaponization of Title IX at grave professional harm. They've established, and they were so reluctant, but they had to send me a letter acknowledging that I was the victimized.
Wow.
And I saved it.
Of course.
They did everything they could to someone who they had to acknowledge was wronged to force her back into my class and make me continue to be subjected to that. And I wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Right.
And so you start to see those things happening. So when we, like you were getting at, like, what are the implications? Why is it the problem, these DEI things? It's because it gives absolute gasoline to that fire.
Mm-hmm.
And it empowers the administrative and the policy-based weaponization in that respect against people who are oftentimes innocent. And, that is a problem. So when your first question you asked me is like, why did I think that was wrong? Well, DEI is wrong for some of the reasons that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's good to discriminate upon anybody. Another reason I knew it was wrong was because when the president came and told us this, he acknowledged it was wrong. He said, I don't want to get caught. I don't want to see ourselves in court. I don't want to have this stuff used as evidence. Let's just change the words. It really does put a target on our back, but let's make sure that we don't do it. We're going to try to compensate by building out a new degree program with the U.S. Space Force, at Patrick Space Force Base up by us, so that we can, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, hold on. So we're going to hide this from the Space Force. We're going to indoctrinate their guardians on the GI Bill and Pentagon funding to indoctrinate warriors.
Wow.
No, so he's telling us that he doesn't want to, he said, I want to fight back. So when people are telling you, this is what we're told, but we shouldn't do these things to get caught doing what we shouldn't get caught doing. Like right off the bat, that puts you in a really tough position ethically. And so that's the second layer to your answer is like, how do I know, why did I know it was wrong? I was like, well, he basically told us it was wrong.
That's right.
He knew it was
wrong.
Like,
admission is a pretty concrete reality, right?
And so that's a tough boat to sail in. And then, third, like at a policy level, it's like there's lots of policies we follow all the time. I'm sure there are policies in the military you follow, and in life, there's speeding limits that we think we should be able to go faster on the road.
That's right.
You know what we do? We generally follow them. Like there's ways to challenge policies. And like, even if I was pro DEI and all that. Like, there is a way to challenge it, which is to sue the Trump administration or to fight back in the proper fashion, not to defraud people who've paid tax money to have money go towards grants to do A, and you're going to misappropriate it to do B. That's a whole other problem. And that's actually what was pitched to us in the meeting that happened beforehand. We were told this story of which then he came and told us in person. And we said, well, if you're going to be our boss and you're going to tell us a written policy blasted out to the university, it says we can't do this, but you're going to tell us, hey, make sure you do it.
Right.
Well, you're setting me up as the fall guy. I'm gonna get in trouble. So I said in the meeting, I said, can he put that in writing or come? He needs to come and we need to hear that from the horse's mouth. I'm not going to get that through telephone game. That he said it was okay for you to do this.
Right.
So he came to the meeting and he said, yeah, we want you to totally undermine this effectively. And he lied. And then he put out statements when James O'Keefe caught him. He lied about the lies. He said those things weren't true. They absolutely
took it out of context. I love that response.
Absolutely garbage.
Right?
So at the time, I hadn't become public as the whistleblower. They all knew it was me because of the way that the camera was angled, and they all knew
it's
that
easy
it was
to
me.
figure it out. Yeah.
But I hadn't come public. They thought probably they could get away with the lie. But I'm a witness. I was there. It was absolutely the context.
Right. There was no mistaking it.
Absolutely not. And so James only had a chance to publish a few things. I've published all over Twitter and in my Substacks now a bunch of additional videos, including the one I even just referred to here, where he's like, we're going to compensate by essentially getting some money from the Space Force and getting DOD money to fill in there's a whole lot more to unpack on that story. And so, 3 levels of which it's wrong. Wrong at a principle level of what the thing is. 2, it's wrong because they told you it's wrong. 3, it's wrong because we still have to follow some policies, and there's a way to challenge that, and it's not by actively undermining it. And if you are going to actively undermine it, don't hold a meeting and tell everybody to do it.
Right.
So
that's crazy.
And
to
so
me.
there's something you said too. Like I all of us, obviously, we are governed by laws and rules. We don't live in the anarchy, state of nature, chaos. You've had to see what that looks like in real battle in third world countries where there is the state of nature and anarchy, and that's order matters, rules and laws matter. But I'm perfectly comfortable in the gray. The gray is life.
Right.
I black and white matters on some things for sure. But at the same time, when we teach our children, they're going to be disappointed when they go to the world and they think everything is black and white, because
that's where I'm at right now.
We have to live in the gray because life is great. There's texture, there's nuance, there are complications, there are, I'm perfectly comfortable operating in the gray. I mean, I basically did an undercover video. So
that's right.
But again, there are.
Well, your whole existence has been to understand the gray and how we process the gray.
You mean the gray matter in between our ears?
Thank you for acknowledging that little pun there. I appreciate that. I think for me, the hardest aspect of teaching that gray area to people, in particular people that you care about, people you're trying to influence, people you're coaching. I deal with it a lot with athletes, right? You're not as good as you think you are, and you've got a lot more to go. And these are the places you need to go. And you're not going to get there unless you do these places, these things. But there's something that takes place within particular people that they either generate an illusion that they don't require those particulars and they can somehow jump ahead, or they continuously, mislead themselves, or they create this, this delusional construct of their own reality that it's, and the more they reinforce it, the further away it gets. And that's what this seems like what's happened, right? This has gotten so far away from what the reality of what it is. Hey, we know these programs are actually they're divisive. They're racist in nature. They're picking one class of people over another. They're using the context of social justice or oppression or colonialism or whatever construct of oppression that they're manipulating. And then what happens is the managerial class that supports it ends up reinforcing it because dollars get connected to it. And you said it yourself, $69 million were affiliated with grants that had been already put in place from the U.S. federal government. Now multiply that times every university. I mean, the most famous one right now is Harvard, right? You look at Harvard's, the Harvard Fund, which is essentially a private equity fund that's masquerading as a college right now. And Trump comes in and says, you know what, you're not getting $9 billion or $7 billion in any more grants, which essentially, stops the capital intake to go out, invest in people like you, to do the research, to flip it and to build the fund, because you're selling it to the companies that are all sitting there salivating over the research. So you're manipulating from the endpoint of who's going to get to do the research and why, right? Based on, classifications that aren't meritocracy or based in meritocracy. Then you're manipulating the outcomes in many cases of the research that's emerging. Then you're pilfering the intellectual property to fit it to the people that are going to play this corrupt game. And so the whole system becomes corrupt from that first initial movement into the gray area.
Man, you're barking up the right tree for me on this. I think a lot about this.
I bet you do. Well, I think you think a lot about everything.
Yeah, sometimes that's the problem.
Yeah, from the first moment we started chatting, it's like, whoa, this is one of the most complicated human beings I've ever met. Not in a bad way either. Man, I don't think when you say you live in the gray, it's like, every shade that's possibly conceivable, right?
Yeah.
And you spend time analyzing each angle.
I spent time losing a lot of wrestling matches for that. In all seriousness, I know you do a lot of coaching and mentoring of people and kids.
Right.
Don't be like me at that. Sometimes when you athletes, when I coach, it's like you got to turn off and go.
Right.
Sometimes. But anyways, let's
wrap this up, because I want to go to that, because that's the thing that the institution has lost out on.
Well, yeah. And so and so, what you were talking about there, when you talk about the losses, or, it made me think of a couple different things. The impact of those discriminatory practices, whatnot, the $500 million that Trump has fined Harvard for, and these kind of things. I think that's great. I celebrate them and I thank them for taking such an important symbolic step. But Harvard's not going to lose sleep over $500 million based on my knowledge of their endowment, right? However, what has to be done and what hasn't not been done is doing what we said earlier, taking this to the smaller time places for all the small time people who are actually the voters who put them in to do these things, and the people who are actually suffering. I'm pretty sure most of their voters aren't coming from Harvard and Columbia.
No.
So it's an absolutely indispensable, necessary, symbolic thing that has to be done at a policy level. However, I would say that how this kind of sloth of a discrimination beast has allowed to emerge in this story we've woven now from 2000 to 2025 has been a lack of accountability because of weakness to impose accountability from leadership, middle managers, higher managers. And I think it crosses into those gray areas of whether you call it theology or spiritual elements. There is we have to be strong as leaders, as followers, as people, to do the right thing and to hold accountable. So for instance, it's like we talked about the $69 million. I didn't pull that number out of my hat. That's what I read at my university published in their newspaper, that they know that they are at risk of losing. But you know what? They're not losing sleep because nobody is having the backbone culturally and administratively in the government. Nobody's taking that money away from them.
No.
Nobody ever does that. It's like
they say it, but it never happens.
Yeah. So, there's a level of weakness of holding accountable.
Well, that's, don't send me down that. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. And it goes back, maybe you can enlighten us on that. where does that moral relativism initiate, right? Because that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
You get exposed so you growing up, the way you did, it would make sense that you have a moral flexibility. But as you've matured, you've only refined that moral integrity more and more and more after each one of the situations that you've experienced at all these different levels.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's like there's a dichotomy in that. Like there's a moral flexibility, but there's also like a moral inflexibility as you learn right and wrong.
Right.
Right and wrong gets solidified as right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You learn how to be flexible in the spots that are ambiguous. Right. So like ambiguity is fine. Like adults have to deal with ambiguity. Like I think that's what discernment is. Maybe we can come back to discernment later, because at a spiritual level, young men, young women, they need to be able to discern what is my path? What is God's word showing me and telling me? That's a difficult thing to wrestle with until you're too old. And now we can look back. So we have that texture and seasoning.
100%.
But that is what discernment is, the gray. Black and white becomes easier to see, but I faced a lot of adversity growing up. Like I've seen my mom arrested for wrongfully. I've wrestled with some really bad corruption and bad things that I saw and abuses happening to us as kids and to other kids, where you become crystallized in understanding what right and wrong is. And at that point, and I imagine combat does the same to you guys in certain respects, right? You learn how to be morally flexible because there's a necessity to that.
Right.
But when you see things and when you see certain things, you're like, okay, like you don't care what the loss is. It's like, demote me. Like, I don't care about my rank type of thing. Like there are times where what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And when you've already paid that price and watched what other people do, I suppose other people look at it differently, but I don't. And, I had a quip from a friend of mine laughing with me not too long ago. He's like, they really kind of pulled you out of hiding and made you go public with this by essentially the Barbara Streisand effect. They tried to buy you off for $100,000 to silence me with a NDA, non-disparagement, and promise never to sue them. I wasn't suing them, and I wasn't talking about it, and I was doing nothing. And instead, they woke a sleeping giant. He's like, anyways, what he quipped, he's like, this is like they should have told the National Guard not to go after Rambo.
100%.
Because
100%. Let him go.
You'll pick him up at a gas station.
Said, let him go.
You'll pick him up.
That's right.
Pumping gas.
The next town.
And everything is going to be just fine.
That's right.
But when you make these crystallized moments of right and wrong, with people who've had to suffer the back ends of what is right and what's wrong.
Well, that's the question then. I mean, that's the question, and not to pivot on the most intense philosophical question that there is other than like figuring out who am I and why am I here, but like what is the difference between right and wrong, and how does that manifest or crystallize? I love how you use the word crystallize, to where it's discernible every day, right? For me, there was a long stretch where I didn't know what that was, and I gave myself the wide range of interpretation, right? And then after an experience I had in Afghanistan, man, that I was really in question of it, and then I'm like, well, I don't know even where to begin to generate the foundation. Now, luckily for me, I chose religion, I chose Christianity, I chose Christ, right? And so that began this 10-year-long exploration of what that looks like. Can I live up to that? Can I hold the standard of it? And then can it be iterable in my behavior day in and day out? And, through that relationship and that confidence that came out of that, and setting that cornerstone, right, I was able to get there, but it took a long time.
I was thinking about this analogy driving down here because I know you have a military background. And to me, it tracks with learning how to shoot in the respect of, like, if you've never shot before, you go down on a range to a target, you know, like you don't know how to control your breath.
Yeah.
You don't know how to control, like there are so many things you don't know, right?
Right.
So you're aiming for the mark of what's right and wrong. Like you're trying to find that, but like you don't really have that guidance.
Yeah.
And so you can figure it out by practice. I'm sure there's some self-made sharpshooters out there, and you know, you don't want to be on the back end of them in a mountain. Like they're great.
That Lucas, the guy that was the YouTube gun guy who just lost his deal with the one armament, got T-Rex arms or whatever. That guy, like, he takes a lot of crap from operators out there, but that kid can shoot, and he's self-taught, and he got better and better and better and better. And so I love the analogy.
But it's a you calibrate through trial and error.
That's right. That's right.
But what I'm getting at is that's probably, it's not an effective way that you guys train people in the military from regular infantry to special forces.
There's a system.
And special operations and what you guys do. The better way to sort of speak to help guide someone to know what is right and wrong, or hit the bullseye. Right. So sticking with the analogy, is to have guidance, to have a teacher, have a mentor, have peer mentors, go through, have guidance, maybe a book, and how to shoot, how do you, you codified these principles that you've learned through your trial and error. And so it turns out when it comes to right and wrong, there's a book. A book that's been around a long time and for a reason. Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing, I read the Lee Strobel book when I was really struggling with whether or not I could do it or not. It was like 2006. And I read The Case for Christ, and I love, he's a classically trained lawyer. He's an investigative journalist. Yeah, my dad was a lawyer, so I love the idea of journalism. I love the idea of seeking out the truth of something, and so that all made sense. And so like it put it in the framework that I could rationalize the magnitude of the miracle. I could say, all right, this guy believes it's true, but then like, all right, now what do you do? And since then it's become the Shroud of Turin, right? That one, that one just blew me away. I mean, that one, the guy that was just recently on Tucker Carlson. I mean, I was a devout, like I'm a devout believer, but that solidified it in a way I could never even imagine, right? And that's science, right? And then there was, for me, it really was about the stories of the apostles. If regular men could allow the message to penetrate their perception of the world they lived in, which was a harsh, brutal world. I mean, under Roman rule, the whole thing. And then to fight against, this, everybody who wanted this idea, this miracle to die, right? To endeavor that and to walk the corners of the earth and be crucified and upside down and ripped apart and all it's like, if those regular dudes like me can do it and become apostolic in their nature, right? And I think that's what it is. It's the battle of nature and our what is it? The miracle faith, right? When you mix those two to create that foundation, now all of a sudden you have a framework to work with.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. It gives me so many different things to think about that I wanted to say, but like that the testimony of the martyrs. Yeah. I mean, that's so I'm Catholic. That's kind of the language that we use about the belief, right? How do we know it's true? So like a couple possibilities. One, they're all liars. They just made it up for whatever reason. Two, mass delusional effect scenario. Three, it's true. And so, there's been lots of people who've kind of walked through those options and ruling out the first two things.
Can you expound on the second one that you said, mass
delusional sort of experience, like mass
Dr.
psychosis?
Robert Malone talked about mass formation psychosis as a result of COVID. So can you just break that out a little bit and how you understand it? So, because I think what a lot of, and I don't mean to cut you off, I got a neuroscientist in front of me, so it's like a dream come true, by the way. So for people that don't get that, because I think there's a lot of that taking place, can you explain that?
Yeah. So in the respect of the theological example, so the idea is that you can have a bunch of people kind of engaged in sort of a group level hallucination of something.
Mm-hmm. The upcoming alien invasion.
Well,
I'm sorry. I got to stop talking.
There's actually, people have written about social contagion.
Yes.
Of things that we now see may manifest in, tranifestos and mass,
I just reported on it yesterday. I went on Clay and Buck's show and talked about it. And
there's obviously the tragedy that was absolutely awful. And, how are people becoming deluded with the notion that they're trans? And part of that is social contagion. This kind of gets to that like mass level hysteria or hallucination that social media has facilitated in a whole new way, because they don't all need to be people in the same place any longer, which historically that's kind of what it was alluding to with the original followers of Christ, which is like, this is some sort of like group level hallucination, which, we can use hallucination in lots of ways. You could say an illusion, like lots of people can be looking at the same thing and still mistake it. And that there's a normalcy to that. That's not a clinical level of a hallucination like in schizophrenia or anything.
Right.
But the idea is that you can still have a big group of people misunderstand something in an innocent way. That's not the lying way. So right there, you have your three options. Like these apostles and the followers and the disciples, they're just lying. They made it
right.
up. Two, there was a group level, innocent, not malintended misrepresentation of an illusory experience.
The Sermon on the Mount, feeding 5,000.
Well, those aren't miracles. Those things probably, I think would probably, even atheists could historically say those things happened.
Right.
A guy went on a mount and gave a lecture. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The issue is, did he resurrect?
That's right.
Did he bring Lazarus back from the dead?
That's right.
Did he create the fish and loaves miracle? Like the miraculous elements.
Yep.
Or they're telling the truth. And so what you were saying, the testimony of the martyrs of, one of the things that made me think of it when you were saying that, a good analogy in like, I think a military context is like, so you guys do SEER, right? Search,
escape, rescue, evasion. Yeah.
Right. Like torture.
Yep.
Most of, at least what I've heard as a civilian, right, is one of the mantras and lessons that come out of those things are that nobody's a Superman. Everybody has a breaking point.
Oh, I can tell you from, I spent 2 years training case officers. Well, I should say they spent 2 years training me, and some of the guys I had access were part of enhanced interrogation, rendition programs. And these were the most elite interrogators who've ever lived, in my opinion. And they always would laugh because, I'd be like, "You'd never break me, bro." And they just like, they give me the, that maniacal laugh. And they would say, "Rut, everybody breaks."
Yeah. And one of the things, and I actually like that we can weave in different themes and stories. I think we both kind of jam on the same vibe for that. But so I did a mission for NASA where I lived in isolation and confinement for 45 days in a space capsule at Johnson Space Center.
Oh my gosh.
And to understand what happens to humans in isolation and confinement during high pressure situations like a long duration space flight to Mars and back, while and the distinction, Rich, right, being from like maybe the things that you guys have done, you can't just look back into say the military records of how do people survive in isolation. So like I talked with Colonel Charlie Plum. He did 4 or 5 years.
One of my favorite human beings. We interviewed him on TNQ. Probably one of my favorite human beings. And his story was a story that changed me.
Yeah. I got his book over there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so, but it's like, you can't necessarily draw on those.
For those who don't know, Charlie Plum was an aviator, got shot down, was in the Hanoi Hilton for almost 6 years. Captain Stockdale, or then became Admiral Stockdale, tapped him to essentially be like the minister or the morale officer of this group in the Hanoi Hilton. And I highly recommend, look up him, Charlie Plum, look up his speeches, buy his book. He is the real deal. Yeah.
Well, and for the younger generation, like the Hanoi Hilton was a torture facility.
That's right.
Absolute awful torture. They were tortured for years and years and years, unspeakable things.
Yep.
And when he came home, his wife was remarried. like talk about a secondary level of breaking and heart torture. Like, and the man has nothing but a impossible to break positive attitude that I can barely even comprehend. He's so inspiring.
It's love.
So like when, you know, so on the NASA side, we can't look to those examples because you have to survive in those situations. You don't have to still land a spaceship. You just
interesting.
Because you still have to be an operator. You still have to be an operator.
Right.
So my buddy's a corrections officer in the Trenton Pen with a bunch of mass murderers, and like he holds order there. I'm like, you can't, I'm not sitting in a cell reading and doing push-ups and pull-ups for the entire duration. Like you are operating, you have to land successfully, you have to fly spaceships, maintain the craft. It's like being on a sub or a ship. Everything has to maintain ship shape, the water filtration, every single, you have to do that while you're in isolation confinement. Imagine doing that level while in SEER at the same time. It's a really difficult thing that we, as humans, we've almost never had to wrestle with. And we found that breaking point. It was only a 45-day mission. Every single person I went in there with like we all, and we're lying about it too. Like when we have to fill out our surveys. How are you guys doing? Oh, feeling great, 100%.
Yeah.
I am falling asleep on the lunar lander and crashing, saying I feel great. And like,
wow. Well, what about the isolation? Because I think this is another main component of that we're seeing in young people performance. There's an isolation kind of emerging, right? What about isolation causes disruption the way we can be operational in our focus?
Ah, man, I mean, it's a deep question with deep answers of layers, right?
Right.
So sometimes I'm sure everybody likes to be isolated at times, but
well, especially my wife when I go on the road.
But like but after a certain period of time, like
and by the way, she only because I never stopped talking to her. That's the problem.
My wife is similarly afflicted.
Yeah. If we could only learn to be quiet more, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My best man gave a great wedding speech about how great of a listener my wife is, and how it was going to work out just really well.
That's you and me both, man.
So
thank God.
You know, when you're isolated in that respect, some of the challenges psychologically is we are social creatures. Even the most isolated of people, we require, interactions. People. Sometimes for our just sanity checks for it, like it's nice to have. But then the problem too is you can be isolated with people. So if you're, lack of a better analogy, at a forward operating base with only 5 or 6 of you guys for a 6-month stretch or a 1-month stretch. Yeah. Your best friends get on your nerves. And when I give talks and like public speaking to things about these missions, I always say like, look, it's hard to get a family of 5 to agree on what to order for dinner at the drive-thru at McDonald's or wherever you're going. The people you love, it's hard to get along with in isolation for even a short period of time. How about not people you love, just coworkers for a 3-year cycle to Mars and back? And it's not on Ernest Shackleton's expedition to the South Pole where you could be at each other's throats if necessary, which is fine, right? Like good teams allow that to happen because it's honest. It polices.
And
you get it out. And so I'm a wrestler. Like I like combat, and we fought our best friends every single day. Punches, neck chokes. Like and when you're done, like you shake hands and you love each other, and we go out for beers and we're literal roommates. But so I understand that iron sharpening of iron as that being a good, loving facet to teamwork. Yeah. If you're holding each other accountable and helping each other to grow and testing each other in the right ways, right? There's a way that you badger too hard. Right. There's toxicity that you need to have a barrier that things can go south on. But on Shackleton, you can come up for air and get that cold air and see the beautiful lands. You can't do it in a spaceship. There's nothing, it's black. Right. It's not like, so there's really weird things people don't think about of that kind of a trip that humans have never had to wrestle with. You still have to be an operator and perform. You can't go out and get fresh air. There's no escape. And I have a friend of mine who's a marriage and family therapist. And I said, how would you run your therapy if you couldn't advocate divorce?
sounds weird because you think that marriage and family therapists would advocate staying together, but her first response, she's like, no, there's such abusive situations. Like, I have to advocate they separate.
Right.
Like, that's not a solution. How do you solve it?
Yeah.
How do you?
Wow.
It's not. You can't.
Well, you can't because you can't turn around.
You can't
go back.
Quit. You can't quit. You can't resign. You can't fire the person.
Wow.
Fundamentally different human experience.
Yep.
And you can kick somebody out of buds. They can quit.
And that actually frees up the consciousness of the collective to move forward, to continue pushing, because the dead weight is being jettisoned, right?
You use a different strategy.
That's right. Right.
How would you survive a mission to Mars if you had to go with some of the people from buds that were dropped?
I mean, initially, I guess there's a sequence. First, you have to establish these are the ground rules. If you break the ground rules, here are the consequences, right?
But the consequences are limited because you can't. Things we're used to on Earth, you can't kick them out. You're not going.
Well, no, but I think the consequence I'm talking about is the level of violence that can be applied.
Which is also very limited in space because you don't really.
Well, you're not going to be like bashing people's brains in.
You might.
Well, I guess that's the greatest fear of that. Because that's the farthest it could degrade.
And that's what we're trying to prevent.
The epitome of violence.
That's why we do the missions now on the ground. We're doing these. They're fake. They're simulations.
Yep.
I have a NASA flight suit.
Yep.
But I always tell people, like, especially at talks where I get confused as an astronaut, I'm like, I'm fake. Like, this is a pretend because simulations are really important. It's a real, like, every a flight simulator. Your pilots need
rehearsals all the time. That's what the whole gist of being successful at any level in performance is rehearsal, right?
So that's why we're doing this, to make sure that we have a successful mission when we go. And so all of which is to say, bring it back to the apostles, if they were in seer and getting tortured or these missions, because every person has a breaking point except them.
Right.
They gave
the breaking point was death.
They were filleted alive. St. Stephen, I think, was St. John was boiled in oil. They're crucified upside. Every single thing that would test them, that would in your world of interrogations and POWs, they didn't break, and that is evidence of truth because they would have broken. They would have said, "No, guys, fine, we made it up. Fine, we stole the body."
They would have capitulated.
That was the point.
Yeah.
That was the point.
That's right.
Like when the apostles were tortured and martyred, and they were having that happen because they testified to watching a person come back from the dead and continue to work miracles and then ascend into heaven and promise to come back. Right. And people said, bullshit.
Yeah.
We will send you to our Gitmo and we will break you and we will get you to recant. And you told me that you just said it. So you just said you had the best guys in the absolute world who can get anyone to recant.
That's right. But not them. So does that become the basis of the research? Like, how do you get the astronaut to be to their faith in the mission is so eclipses all sense of self-preservation? How do you get them to do it? Is it conditioning? Is it imprinting? Is it, because I think this is what we're talking about in the whole thing, right? This is what we're talking about. We're talking about the assault on truth and the ability to not back down when it's the hardest. I mean, that's the whole gist of why you initially came on. That's why I wanted to explore it at this level.
Yeah.
So is that for anybody in their quest for truth or purpose or meaning or whatever? Because I think the quest becomes to live in a state of truth, right? That's the ultimate sense of that you have meaning in life. If you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am living a life in pursuit of truth. And then, the ideation of truth is emblematic of a moral structure, right? And you can live in that way. We don't degrade into chaos and mass, the 20th century.
And we're talking about this as like middle-aged men, using the concepts that we have developed as old guys, essentially. I think, say for instance, lack of a better number, 20-year-olds, I think they have that, but it's unconscious, and they don't think about it in the same, like they're not necessarily going to have that same conversation with the words we're using, but they're doing the same thing. Everyone is on their path seeking that. And what I would say to them is that you will get to that point of this realization that you're saying and that we're talking about, which is how do you know what's true? Because when you're young, you're going through life because you're being pushed through growing up and the system and what have you, but you're not always thinking about what's true at the deeper philosophical level, unless some people do, right? But like most people probably aren't. You're going out having a good time or what have you, but what ends up happening that I've seen, I've experienced, and sounds like it's tracking with what you're saying too, is that you start to develop, this notion that you're looking at the world you're living in, you're like, this doesn't seem real, or what is real about it? I mean, philosophically, that's what Descartes asked. And he said,
100%.
What's real? I think, therefore I am.
That's right. 10 years in a cabin in isolation.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, right?
So, your question was...
Well, it's the acceptance of metacognition. If I can think about thinking and do it in a systematic way that I can ground myself in truth, whatever the truth you choose is, then I have a shot at a healthy framework of reality, right?
I have a little bit of data for you. I'll come back to you on that in a second, because I published a study on that, actually.
Oh, I knew you did. All right.
But you asked, like, how do we get the astronauts to that point? And I would say my answer is that it's that the question is actually the opposite. The astronauts are already at that point. When you launch, like it's like when you I haven't served in the way that you guys have served, but like I imagine when you first deploy, like you're feeling pretty good. You're excited. Go get some.
I was scared. Like initially I was good, but then the reality of combat hit me. Because on the way over, a friend of mine, Matt Bourgeois, was blown up, and then it was like, that's what I'm talking. So when you're like the beginning, everything's exciting. The astronauts have been trained. They're already at that point of like max resilience. Yes,
like you are fortified. The question that we don't have the best that we are asking scientifically, that we are running these missions and these simulations to study and to find the answer to, is how do we prevent the breakdowns because you're starting off at a ceiling.
Yep.
What happens is, like you just said, at some point, it could be immediately upon deployment, there's a degradation, and you're like, whether it's a long-term slow roll degradation or an immediate, like, oh crap, you're Matt was his name, was like, that's a fast degradation.
Right.
Like, oh shit, this is a wake-up call. Now I get it, and it's different. We need to understand as a science and a culture, how do we make sure that we don't have that degradation, or really accept that it's going to happen? But what NASA's words they use are develop countermeasures for. So there's lots of countermeasures for these, what they call deficits in behavioral health. So, and I actually think that's an important framework, because we can't go in there like to sear thinking that we're going to be the Superman who won't break.
Right.
We have to accept this will happen. The degradation will occur. We will break down. What we need to do is be prepared for A, mitigating it, 2, knowing what to do when it happens, and 3, overcoming it to be able to continue to ensure mission success.
Right.
And the mission success happens because we've been successful with the people. So we don't have great answers. That's why we're running these studies. And part of that goes back to, when astronauts will come back from space, they'd ask them, how things went, particularly during the short mission era of the shuttles. And the sort of the running quip was that, like, there was no bigger group of liars in the world, because everyone's like, oh, it went great.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to admit that there was a problem interpersonally or interdynamically with the team, because then it's like, well, maybe I won't get picked up for the next mission. I don't get a second trip back to space, right?
Well, it's the same thing with us.
Yeah.
I mean, you get the guy who's at his 10th deployment. He's been operating for 17 straight years in the GWAT. He's fried, from an endocrine probability from an Enkin system. He's got massive traumatic brain injury from blast wave exposure. His orthopedic, pain is off the charts, right? He's not sleeping. He's got migraines. He's got vestibular issues. He's got everything that falls within the component of operator syndrome, right? And then he's got the mental health stuff as well too, the survivor's guilt, the lack of intimacy with his home life, the sense of never being able to maximize the experience, the existential experience he felt in combat anywhere else. So it's like this whole thing. But what do you ask? And you see it on people, right? You see it. That's the one unique thing about where you really, I think the higher degree of maybe not empathy or compassion, but the higher awareness of those that you care about. You know them, you know their baselines, you know their highs, their lows, and you see it happening and you go, are you okay? I'm fine. I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's right.
And for lots of reasons. One of it, you don't want to admit that there's something wrong. Mm-hmm. Two, you don't want to miss the chance for the next thing too.
Come off the line.
And so they built these missions out because they still know that there are interpersonal problems or team dynamics or like things happen, right? We're humans. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, we can't have this happen on the long trip. Like This has to be fleshed out. And we have to first build a culture to where it's acceptable to tell the truth that things didn't go well. And, organizationally mm-hmm. within like the hot wash app, like you have to be able to come back and be like, I can speak the truth and I know it's not going to affect getting access to the next mission. Mm-hmm. That's a tough thing to build.
For sure.
But, and I can't even imagine what some of those guys would come back with of everything you just described. I know when I came back from the mission I did, there were challenges that I generally tend not to get into just out of respect for some facets of the mission and the team. But
right.
There were times I was an anvil to a hammer. And,
yes.
and I felt that way
it's funny you say that, man. I actually talk about the choice of being the anvil or the hammer in your life, man, because and I had this young man who I've known a long time, mentored him a long time. He's being medically retired from a tier 1 unit. And as he was going through that, the process of the training to get into this unit, like he was midway through and he gave me that analogy. He's like, because he was telling me the insane physical pressures that they were putting him on top of the emotional and cognitive requirements for the operational requirement, right? You can't miss. You can't make the wrong step. There was no latitude in this level of life and death. And he says, I remember him saying, he's like, Rut, he's like, it's making the choice. Are you going to be the anvil, right? Are you going to place yourself on the anvil or are you going to have life place you on the anvil? And that either way you're getting the hammer, no matter what. So how are you going to perceive it?
Well, yeah. and I took great pride in that respect of being, so I'm the oldest of 7 in my family.
Wow.
My dad went AWOL, like I was parental child. I've been an anvil in a lot of ways for a lot of things, for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And you look at it exactly as you said, there's a choice of a way in which you look at it. Anvils are immensely strong.
Yeah. Anvils
absorb a lot of pain and pressure because they're strong. Yeah. They're, and so that's a positive thing. And, that analogy from that mission, I did that to help the mission move forward so that others didn't have to be the anvil.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
And I was proud to do that's service leadership.
That's right.
That's
right.
But it, it still came at you bottle a lot up. That came at a big cost. So like when I came home from the mission, like it wasn't anything like you guys have done or the duration or extent, but like it was weird. Like I generally, like I couldn't really talk to people about it.
No.
And
that's the toughest part.
And if I did, they wouldn't get it. and or you'd get like trite answers of like cliches and you're appreciative of the effort, but like, you know,
it's not the genuine curiosity.
No, and I would just sit in the dark sometimes in my apartment by myself and just enjoy it.
Yeah.
Of like,
wow.
Because you're just processing stuff and you're working through things. And so like I have enormous respect for what those guys must handle because, you know, like in wrestling, we teach young boys and men that they need to be absolute savages on a mat and, you know, killers on the mat.
Right.
Well, you know, within boundaries, within rules, but such is life. But we also teach them as coaches and teachers and in the framework of the education system that when you step off that mat, you are a gentleman.
That's right.
And so the dichotomy.
That's the thing.
So what I hear when you guys come back and you're like, I just, you know, I was reading Eddie Penny's book and he's like, so I come back and I'm driving like crazy around Baghdad and I come back and people look at me like I'm a savage because I'm like, what? And he's like, I guess I need to recalibrate that.
That's right.
Because there's these dual messages.
That's like I mean, the perfect description is you build a tool and the human is the tool for a particular mission, right? And the most extreme missions require the most extreme, like you said, pressure, heat, pain, right? And so what are you doing? I think there's a natural, innate, maybe levity's not the right word. There's a natural component of the human condition that is affiliated with the ease of interaction, the facilitation of reciprocal emotion, right? Those back and forth that make life enjoyable, right? The pursuit of happiness, if you want to call it that, right? Those guys were pretty smart. But it's man, there's a lot of other missions that's not conducive. So we have to do these other things to get the result, right? To test what's underneath that.
It's an extraordinary burden that are put on our warfighters to come home and then said, just now
be normal.
Flip that switch off and be normal to people. And, you know, like your family just wants their dad. Like they don't want, like, you know, it's just it's such a weird contrast. It's
and I think
very difficult to wrestle with.
I think we're dealing with that in a pretty profound societal way right now. We've been put on the anvil in all these different ideological, these forced ideological influences. And now what's happening is we're like, no, we're the degradation of, not that it wouldn't be the degradation, it'd be the emergence of that morality, that core stuff that you worked so hard from Chicago, in wrestling, through academia, through the national mission, and then into that moment where you are now, where it's like, no, I had to do what I did because of all of this.
Yeah, and if I can riff on that for a moment, there's a lot I could unpack on it that, you know, one level, when I would go through, I had a couple different instances in which things came up of real ethical challenges or quandaries, just difficult things like mountains I didn't want to climb. And I thought to myself, you know, like, this is so hard to do. But then I thought, like, but I've been through so much. I should, if what I have been through isn't enough to prepare someone for this, then nothing would be. So then I should do this because no one will if not. And so that was the past was God preparing me for the future with the strength. Because to answer your question, how do you make those decisions in the gray, the discernment? How do you do what's right and wrong? And there are some really big times in life of right and wrong, like when life and death changes on it. And that might be living or dying, but it could also just be someone's life and death of where does their career trajectory go, because you're the person in charge of deciding that. Whether you're an HR representative or a judge or a cop or all sorts of things, right? You can control lots of people's life trajectories. You can do the right thing and the wrong thing in your own life too. Some really big calls. And to me, that would be like taking a kid from MEPS, the entry point of the military, and putting him on a tier 1 team. You don't have the skill. You're not going to lift 500 pounds on a deadlift right off the bat. You need to build up. So in the same way, I think your ethical discernment and mental fortitude of discerning gray and black and white, that is, you think of it as a muscle in the brain or your soul. It's really more of a soul muscle than a brain thing. That has to be developed and built through smaller decisions of things, which is kind of what I was referring to. When you grow up or you see things that are right and wrong, you learn things. You also learn, and we mentioned this earlier, suffering. Like when you learn that, so for me, like I got the living shit kicked out of me day in and day out in wrestling. Times I thought I would die. I literally thought I was going to die and get choked out or killed or broken. Like there were absolute beasts and killers like in my room that were very, very good. And I wasn't, as basically the contrast. They didn't even have to be that good. I sucked. But you learn that you can suffer, and every time you think you're going to quit, you come back the next day, and one day more, and one day. And before you know it, you're the last guy standing after 4 years when everybody else has walked away for whatever reason. And you realize that you can do it because you've done it, but it's those little decisions. So like, the stuff that we were talking about and that James talked about, these big, turning down $100,000 to not stay silent and to tell the truth instead of give into a lie, or to speak up against the president when he's telling us to undermine some pretty serious stuff. Those things don't, I suppose they could happen in a vacuum, but generally speaking, those are really, really tough calls.
Yes.
And I'd be lying if I said it was so easy, because it wasn't. And I remember, because we mentioned the apostles, I'll go back to that. I went to my priest, and I mentioned this because it's a good example of things to keep in mind for leadership when people are mentoring others, because people will come to you for advice, and the way that we answer advice changes their course trajectories too as leaders. And so I went to one priest and I said, hey, I'm going through this thing. If you could just kind of keep me in prayer. I've had to blow the whistle on some rough stuff at work. And I want to be able to do the right thing, but I don't. And I had one priest say, you could tell he got uneasy. And he kind of gave a very, what you'd think of as like a trite or a cliche kind of answer. He's like, okay, well, sure. I'll pray for you, but I'll pray, try to be like the disciples of Christ. And this was in the week of Lent, right before Easter, the Passion.
Wow.
And so that was his advice to me. But to me, when he told me that, first of all, the vibe I got was like an uneasy one.
Yeah.
And like as if I might be doing something wrong.
Yes.
But he would pray for me, which is like, we're in the South here. So, the slight that.
Oh, absolutely.
But then the other thing it made me think of, right? And we don't always think about this as leaders, of how people listen to what we say, but what I heard during the week, Holy Week in the Passion, he's like, I'll pray for you to be like the disciples of Christ. I'm like, you mean the guys who abandoned him?
That's right.
What kind of courage? Because I was looking for courage.
Yeah.
What I was looking was to be encouraged and have that courage.
Go put yourself on a cross. Up. It's worth it.
Yeah. Because you're calibrating this discernment. Yeah. And I'm like, during this particular week, it was the women who went to his cross.
That's right.
His disciples did not one of them designed him 3 times. And I guess John was at the cross. Okay. Sorry, John. But for the most part, they weren't really bastions of courage at that point. Yeah. That was what the resurrection re-emboldened them, and the Holy Spirit came down. They gave them the courage that they needed, that they thought they had. Remember, first they're like, no, I'll do anything. And
anything.
He's like, really? How about like 3 before the night's over, you're going to die? Not a chance.
Not a chance.
Right?
Yeah.
He's like, all right, bro.
On the rock.
But so that, I thought about that, and I'm like, is that a great example? But then, and I was mad about it, because then I went to another priest literally 20 feet away at the other side of the church, shaking people's hands, and a very different style person.
Yeah.
And I told him, he's like, St. Joseph's feast day is coming up. He's he is the defender against demons and the fighter against the worker for your work. And he's like, you will be strong. And I was like, yeah.
There you go.
Let's rock. Right. So I was mad about that at first, but then in the last couple of weeks, I've been thinking about that from about 5 months ago. And I realized, what you said, I'm like, well, he didn't say when. They were all actually pretty courageous. They all they were martyred. Okay, so, but as leaders, we don't know, we need to be mindful of how people hear what we say.
Yes.
Because we may give the wrong context and they can interpret things a little bit differently. Right. And it's kind of like old man talking from my point of view as like, how do we mentor and coach younger people up and keeping that in check?
Mm-hmm. It's giving them the space, giving them just enough, planting and dropping enough seeds so that when they're ready, that the manifestation of that courage can present itself in the right time, the right place. But to have the understanding and the expectation that sin is always tempting us to take the easier route.
It is. Yeah. And that's where, again, I come back to that idea that, like, how do we make these important big decisions? It's everyone will face in life.
Yeah.
It's through practice. It's whether it's mental practice or physical practice, lifting weights or doing arithmetic. If we have, about 10 or 12 years ago, I wrote a blog series for a UFC fighter, Matt Lindland. Mm-hmm. Becoming a very close friend of mine. He spoke at my wedding. He fought Fedor Emelianenko. Yep. If you remember the old days, like, he's OG.
Yeah.
One of my very best friends now. But I wrote a series for him during the George Zimmerman trial here in Florida that was in the national news, and I was just watching it. And I wrote the series. It's called A Dearth of Heroism, saying that, like, we just don't have people in society who often are comfortable taking heroic action of ethical or physical courage necessary. Because I was watching some witnesses and testify in that case who, like, basically heard whoever it was kicking the shit out of the other person in that battle. And he said, so I hid in the bushes and called the cops. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, maybe, like, I'm a kind of person who goes to the fire to help. Sometimes that's not always the best advisable. I understand there's times where I
don't know. I think it's always the best thing to do.
Yeah.
Regardless of the pain you're going to suffer, because then you'll never have the regret that you didn't.
Yeah, because somebody died.
That's right.
In that case.
That's right.
And so I wrote this, it was called A Dearth of Heroism. And I think this is what we're still talking about here, which is that in culture and society, we have what some people would call a dearth of heroism. That doesn't mean none. I think that there's incredibly brave and courageous people doing amazing things. Mm-hmm. And the series I wrote back then actually featured that too. Mm-hmm. But the point was to say, how do we build this? And in that framework, it was through wrestling and mixed martial arts. You have to teach kids that it's okay to get beat up. You will rebuild. It's okay to have the courage to go out on a mat or in practice against a kid who's bigger and better than you. Because that is scary. Mm-hmm. When you can do that and you learn how to suffer, and then somebody comes up to you at work in a white collar situation and they're like, you should be scared. And you're like, of what? Of what? Mm-hmm. It's like, what was you're old enough to remember Rocky V. It's like, sue me for what?
Yeah, that's right.
Because he knows how to suffer.
That's right.
And, that's something that, you guys are obviously world-class trained in how to suffer. Suffering is a skill. Mm-hmm. It's a theological one too.
100%.
And when
it's all connected.
And when you suffer theologically, to me, I've learned this over the last 3 or 4 years. As a parent, we went through some really bad suffering of a really sick kid. My wife almost died in my arms in labor.
Sorry.
And like we suffered in extraordinary ways that brought us to our knees and made us prayerful. And that helped us grow. The suffering was the gift. And knowing how to do the suffering and have it be a gift and have it humble you towards prayerfulness and growth is like, that's how we've got now, people shouldn't mistake me. I'm not saying to beat people up because it's going to make them stronger and they're going to learn how to, this is not a justification for abuse and taunting or but we do need to allow people and kids to scrape their knees and elbows, learn how to fail, learn how to suffer. And this comes back to this DEI thing.
That's right.
So this is, you asked me, what have I seen it manifest at? Why is this the hill to die on that I chose to hold firm on and speak the truth about? It's because this has been happening, as our conversation has alluded, for over 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen over 25 years is everything goes south.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's lots of reasons for that, but one of these this tracks in correspondence to that. Like you talked about the patents and the science discoveries that people want to make. Guess what? We're not making a lot of science discoveries. Like in the academic world, there's a whole rabbit hole, if you like going around rabbit holes, of how broken science is.
Mm-hmm.
They went, in business, you say you go woke and go broke. Well, in science, they went woke, but they are broke. Like science has a replication crisis. You can't replicate most findings. There's a huge fraud issue in science. So much major findings have been found to be fraudulent. The biggest model for Alzheimer's disease turned out to be fake papers that they spent then $500 million of investment into drug treatments based upon. It was all fraudulent. And, when you're promising treatments to people whose parents can no longer remember them.
Yeah.
Like that's a different kind of evil too. Like, and so we fund science in America to make explorations and discoveries. But when we're funding it with decisions based upon features that are not ability and merit and excellence and skill, then it's not going to be able to execute what we needed to do in making the discoveries that save lives and improve society. You may end up with something that looks like how you want it to look like, but it's not going to work like how you want it to work like. And, it's something I think Americans have always held the deepest respect and regard for your communities in special operations, because we've always assumed and believed that you guys are the last bastion holding the line of standard.
I think we are.
And what we haven't done that. It would be the equivalent of like, you guys wouldn't be able to operate if you started selecting people not based on.
If we change the standard.
And I know there's military conversations about that for a long time about what happens and the risk thereof. But I'm here reporting back from the front lines of education and science and the intellectual side of the academy that we gave up that fight 25 years ago.
Wow.
And where would your community be if that fight was given up 25 years ago? And that's where we're at right now in science and education.
Wow.
And so that's why it's important. That's why I took a stand, because if we are to save a nation, if we are to save our culture and our society so that we can educate people instead of indoctrinate them, then somebody has to hold the line. Somebody has to say the emperor doesn't have any clothes. Somebody has to say these are wrong things and you're doing the wrong things about the wrong things. And that's why it's important. And I've seen it weaponized. I've experienced it weaponized, and we've had a weakness in leadership of holding those things accountable. Even now, you allow companies or universities to fix their websites, to fix their words, but you keep the same people in place.
That's right.
The deeds don't change. And those are the same institutions that keep getting the funding. And in your world, they accept the GI Bill to train leaders to take that indoctrinated philosophy and take it back to the military, and so that they can interrupt the standard bearing, selection based on a faulty indoctrination of education, and it matters.
I tell you, Rick, I'm blown away by not only your courage to have the stance that you took, but the way you think about it. I mean, a lot of people will make stances based on a gut feeling. They know it's wrong, and so they'll wave their hand and all that. But I think what makes you so unique is that you can articulate the reasoning behind it and the importance of why we need to do this, why we need to stand up for what we believe in, and why we have to hold the line of that pursuit of truth, that integrity, and that foundation of the things that I think societies need as a whole to be able to rely upon.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. And coming from you, I don't know that I deserve such kind words from men like yourself, but it does mean a lot. I've always looked up and aspired to be everything all of you guys have always been. But there's a real tangible connection to this. We talked about the communist applications of this, of control of humans, control of society. But like, one of the people in that meeting was a foreigner from Europe on an H-1B visa, actively working to indoctrinate his students with European communism principles. These are not esoteric theoretical things. That it happened. I caught it. I proved it. I have the video. And those things are happening
all over. Yeah, and it's. I think there's an infection,
and they're laughing about it. Yeah. I have a film where they're laughing. They're literally laughing about teaching it.
They've been unchecked for so long, and like any idea, any infection that goes undiagnosed and then treated, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And that's the whole gist of communism. That's the whole gist of these radical ideologies. But, I think now we're in a place where we're done. There's enough people beginning to stand up and fight back and push back. And you've been that person.
Well, if I may, one thing that I think has happened, like you said, they've been getting away with it so long because nobody said or did anything.
That's right.
We had, for, I guess what you would say, 2 generations since the global war on terror, our warriors were sent to war. Our fighters, you guys, were sent to war. And we talked a little bit, I felt drawn to it. And for whatever reason, I kept getting taken out. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of a weirdo in the academic culture because I'm actually a trained fighter in wrestling and hand to hand. I'm used to being comfortable, being uncomfortable,
suffering,
being in a contentious, combative scenario and being comfortable there if necessary. But that's not usual.
Mm-hmm.
Our generation, they said all of our people taught all you guys how to fight, and we gave away the ship domestically. And in 2016, most people don't know this, but I remember watching it because at the presidential nominating RNC convention, I think it was Marcus who gave a speech.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't remember probably Marcus's speech, but I remember it because I remember. And he said he came back from war, but he realized that the actual battlefront here is domestically on the front of our culture and society.
That's right.
And he was not wrong. He was absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
We are now seeing that manifest. And, I think that people are starting to answer the call, but they're doing that because of the inspiration and the guidance of people like you. So I came across your videos in 2014 and they were so good and about motivating young men and people to have integrity, to live a life of virtue and to hold the line of your standards of integrity. And I was trained by programs that built Olympians and really high level elite coaches. And when I saw what you were saying, and I didn't know much about your background, but it instantly resonated. I'm like, this is an elite level person training people for free on YouTube through your Frog Logic program. And it was right. And what you're doing matters, and it leaves a very big impact where whatever it's been 11 years now, I can meet you today and be like, hey, you actually impacted that.
Well, I appreciate that, Rick. It means the world. I think the whole gist is, I learned pretty early on that the suffering is the pathway to salvation. And so how do you teach people that? How do you say, hey, guess what? If you want to become the person you want to become, you have to go seek out the suffering, the pain. It's imbued. It's imbued in life regardless. I mean, you're a product of, that imbued suffering.
It takes courage to seek out the suffering.
That's right.
It's scary.
That's right. Especially if you've been indoctrinated in it as early as childhood, where you like, oh, man, I don't want any of that anymore for my whole life. And then you figure out the mechanisms to deflect or defend or to ignore or to reroute or whatever away from it because it was so intense, whatever these periods, whether you were a kid or whether you went through trauma as an adult or went to combat or whatever it is, or had to be a whistleblower. It's so impactful. It's so, it fractures us, right? It fractures, I think it fractures us to our core, to where we really have to believe, is our foundation going to hold up under this on this anvil, right? As we're getting waylaid. And that's what I always have been trying to do. And let me ask you this, and this is something like, I know that you have left the university and you're, I think what was just blew me away is that you're mowing lawns for in the meantime. What would be the thing that you would want to do most right now? Like what would be the perfect scenario to go back into academia, to go back to work, maybe to work for a Starship, to work for an athletic department during neuroscience research on the modern athlete? I mean, what would be the perfect thing for you that would give you that sense of that sense of purpose and meaning, that all of this is worth it?
Man, that is such a good question. I don't know that I even have a great answer because it's been such a whirlwind. It's like I just ended a 25-year trajectory on a dime, and I'm trying to turn a cruise ship or an aircraft carrier around in a moment. Like it's been such a whirlwind and such choppy waters, and I haven't had time to really like decompress and unpack what's next or what. I mean, I'm the kind of person that is interested. I'm capable for pretty much all those things. I have a couple small LLC companies. I actually started one called Space Psychology, where I actually want to do the kind of psychological work that we were doing, that we were talking about in our conversations, and take towards these commercial and NASA space-based applications because of my experience being both a crew member and a principal investigator of these missions studying astronaut cognition. One of the things I got to see is that we're at an embryonic level of understanding those things at NASA for psychological exploration, long duration spaceflight. And I think we can do it better than what can sometimes be shackled by in the government, like NASA system.
Right.
And I was talking with one of the astronauts at the astronaut memorial for Columbia and Challenger explosions this past January, and I was explaining this idea and said, "Hey, I like to build this out. Do you think it resonates with your time on the ISS and isolation, confinement, and the challenges there as a military guy too?" And he said, "We don't. DoD had a much better system in place than NASA does. Coming back from deployment, they have a better build out for bringing people back and transitioning." She said it's still pretty bad. But he's like, NASA's like, you come home and they're like,
"See ya.
Thanks.
Yeah. Great job."
Yeah. Now you got to answer, but you got to go do all the kids' elementary schools. You don't get a rest. Everybody wants it because you're a celebrity. Everybody,
right.
You get to do it. I talked to a French astronaut at one of these missions, and he said that. He said, you spend 4 years training with someone, with a team. You go and you do this mission for 8 months. It's immensely bonding. I mean, you're forged like any of your teams would be forged.
I'm sure.
And you come home, and as soon as you land in Kazakhstan at that point, every country of your team has a team of people, a truck and a helicopter, basically. And as soon as you land, you go to the 4 opposite corners of the earth and you stop talking. And you text for here and there, but he's like, but at that moment, the breakup. He's like, I was there. I was in space for 8 months or whatever it was. And he's like, then I come home and like 2 days later, I'm stuck in traffic in the Circle in Paris trying to go get to the president to receive a medal, and I can't get out of traffic. And he's like, it was just so surreal, and everybody wants a piece of you, and all you want to do is rest.
That's
and
right.
Decompress. And so like, that's kind of my answer right now. Like I would do all those things. I'm interested in a lot of them, but I think, I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me real quick.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you have listened to what Rick is about, and something pops in your head for your program, your school, your science, your evaluation, whatever it might be, make sure you get, we're going to put out all of his contact information and reach out to him, because you should have an overwhelming response. I'm praying, and that opportunities come to your door, because not only have you shown your intelligence here and in every aspect of your career, but your integrity most. And I think that's the key, because putting all that together, that doesn't always happen. And I think that's the wrestler in you for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a way to bookend that answer for you too, is like, I've talked with some other friends about similar things, and what they've said is that what businesses look for or need most is moral leadership. So in terms of leadership, that's something that I would want to bring is moral leadership to, as a culture. Our ships are not doing well. We have a lot of rats on the ship. We need to make things ship shape again. And that stems with moral leadership. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I want to bring forward to wherever we go, because I'm committed to putting our kids on the right pathway forward and building this not out for us, but for them to inherit what we have become stewards of. And, and so, I hope to make a good contribution to any place.
I know it's
and do the right thing, because it is important. And, and we've seen that, like I've seen the education system fail at producing it. Great inflation, pushing people through. Mm-hmm. I've seen students who struggle with reading, writing, math in college. And we're going to right that ship. I've been committed to it and still committed to it. And we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to do things in the right way.
Wow.
So when I would watch a lot of your shows, you talk a lot about the negative insurgency. So I'm curious, like, where that came from for you, and how did you conceptualize that? Because one of the things that when I first came across your Frog Logic program years ago, I was already a professional neuroscientist. I was doing a postdoc, and like when you're talking about positive and negative insurgencies as you framed them, the brain has positive and negatively charged ions that will make cells fire or not fire. And it's not a good or a bad thing in that respect. So sometimes you want to inhibit cells or brain areas from firing because they're going to make you do something you shouldn't do. So like think of like Tourette's is a problem where that inhibition is gone. And so you need the negative balance with the positive. I know that's not exactly the way you frame the negative insurgency with, but where did that come from, and how did you tap into applying that with like the brain-based integration of, all your mentoring and leadership stuff that you're doing?
Well, the biggest thing for me was the fear that was always present. And I remember when I left the agency, one of the number one questions you'd get was, were you afraid in training? And I was like, it's such a personal question. And I was kind of a snapperhead, and I was just like, well, I'd make some stupid, have you ever had a 300-pound boat on your head, immersed in freezing cold water, running 200 miles with, 96 straight hours, you're up 4 hours of sleep in a full week, and they'd be like, no. And I go, you'd be afraid too, and it's like, that's how I would push back similar questions about combat. But then someone asked me for real, like, how, if you were so afraid, how'd you do it? And I didn't know the answer to that. And so that began this going down this road to understand where fear comes from. and where it originates and how we're taught it and how we cultivate it. And so, I mean, the first place you start is fight or flight, and then you understand the limbic system and how the amygdalas work and how the hippocampus works. And then I found a book on positive neuroscience, and that was by Martin Seligman. And that one was a massive flip for me, because I was like exactly what you said, there is a positive and negative electrical thing taking place. And when you understand how our hormones and our stress hormones work, and that war that's taking place between those in your limbic system, right? And then the big one was, your amygdalas actually can generate positive emotion as well too. And the case study was like, you go to a concert and there's 65,000 people. Like, I just took my family, we were up to New York over the summer, and we went and saw Zach Bryan. And at the end, he sings this song called Revival. And it's like a 20-minute song. And there were 60,000 people singing this. And I'm looking at my children, from 12 to 17. And then I'm looking at people in their 60s screaming the song, females, males, different races, different genders, different cultural backgrounds, and the same energy is being exuded. And so I'm like, whoa. And then I thought back to the suffering and the pain of combat and how that affects everybody. It's the energy that infuses into us under sorrow or pain or whatever. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So it's really, I think, an idea of perception. And that's why, like, fast forward, Jordan Peterson, when I'd gotten canceled off the internet, and lost everything, lost my business from COVID, everything, I'd lost it all. I found this lecture he gives called Restructuring Your Perceptions Part 2. And the way he deconstructs it and then builds it back up, right? From the nature of writing a book, right? Well, I'm not, I start at, I'm going to punch a key, and then I'm going to punch multiple keys, and I'm going to connect those keys into a word. Then I'm going to put these words into a phrase. And then I'm going to put these phrases in a paragraph, and hopefully that paragraph makes sense. Well, what's the intention behind the paragraph? What are you going to teach? And so these perceptions of each step, each phase, each concept, and so you build on those, right? And the more ambitious that you want to be becoming a Navy SEAL, the more you have to have, a focused conviction towards the steps it takes to get there. Well, each step is riddled in pain and fear. And so if my perception's off, then I'm never going to get to reach the pinnacle of the ambition, right? And so I'm putting all this together, and then all of a sudden I start understanding how we teach fear, how it's built into almost every fabric of every phase of your life, right? From the immediacy of physical fear. Don't touch the hot stove. Don't cross the street without looking. Don't go up next to that bad guy, all the way to the point, well, if you don't accomplish this, you're not going to be accepted into society. If you don't, and so
fear's a crazy thing.
It's a fucking crazy thing, right? So I get after like 2 years of this, and I'm like, yeah, but none of what I was figuring out gave me the answer of the unknown realities, how it just hits you when you like, you don't even, you be 1 minute you're good, and then some little thing getting pinned on a mat can destroy a whole season. One submission or one mistake can spiral the entirety of this pathway you're on. Why is it so profound? And I immediately correlated it because guys were starting to commit suicide. It started to pick up. And meanwhile, these are the most impressive, hard human beings I've ever known in my life, but they're spiraling out. What's going on? And it became these invisible battles that nobody, and you talk about that isolation, it's the invisible battles that emerge. And it starts as the whisper or the scratch, right? Or starts as the itch, or it starts as the doubt. And those are the insurgencies. And those were the people we were fighting. They weren't the army in front of you. It wasn't toe to toe, because you can rationalize toe to toe, right? You can generate, that's the liftoff. That's going to Mars is the toe to toe fight. But it's, hey, well, you got to get back in the fight every day for 3 years. And that's what ends up breaking. It's
fighting another person is the easiest thing in the world.
Hands down.
Fighting yourself, like wrestling and fighting yourself, that's the ultimate opponent, and that's the real battle. And you know, so it resonated with me when I was hearing you share a lot of that, both online and then again here. You know, fear is so powerful. I've heard it in two different ways. Like I had friends who were test pilots at Edwards, and they would say for a while, part of the sort of maxim is like, guys wouldn't want to go up and fly with people who weren't married with kids, because it changes your risk calibration.
That's right.
And it makes you more governable by fear, because fear is a helpful thing and a good thing too.
That's right.
You know, like just like I'm sure like you there's probably exceptions to this too, right? But like, it's probably nice to go out on patrol with people who have a family that want them home.
100%. They're more focused. They're more acutely aware. They're paying better attention.
Are they going to take different risk profiles?
Some do, but most don't. Most the guys that I've worked with, it reinforces their determination to not make mistakes.
Precisely. But that's the risk profile. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
You make sure that you take the risks that are calculated.
That's right.
And mistake proof. Like because there's a different thing, but at the same time,
the cowboys go away quick once there's other people involved.
Well, and who wants to strap your wagon to a cowboy that doesn't want to come home?
That's
and
right.
People ask about this with Mars all the time. They're like, would you take I'm like, no, it's a return trip home. You don't want to go with somebody who doesn't want to come home.
That's right.
And astronauts would say this at times. I forget who, I've heard from somebody, but they would say that people would ask them, are you scared? He's like, well, yeah. He's like, I don't want to go to space with someone who's not scared.
I mean,
like, why would you? And in combat, when we go to UFC or mixed martial arts stuff, like it's like when you mentor and coach guys training up before the match, they got the butterflies. They got this. And they're scared.
Dude, I worked with one of the greatest UFC fighters in human history, Andrei Arlovsky. And I remember when I was working with him, he was in his 18th year. And I remember we were getting ready to go in a fight. It was, I think, his Chicago fight that I did with him. And you could tell, I watched it come over him. And I'd been with him 2 fights before, and it was a little different in those, but this one was more meaningful. That's where he'd got his start. He lived in this one world shitty apartment, and now he's back to the space, and it's like he's in the twilight of his career. And you saw it, and I'm like, are you all right? And he's like, yeah, I'm good. And I was like, are you feeling it more intensely? He's like, yeah, of course I am. And he's like, and I'm like, why? And he's like, I'm going to get into a fight. And there's no other thing.
But like I tell kids, like when you don't feel the butterflies is when you should be worried. They're a good sign that you know what's at stake, you know what's at happen. And so you teach the kids to embrace that. That's not a thing to be scared of. That's a fear to embrace, because it means you're on the right path. And it's funny. So we had a really similar conversation a couple of years ago. I used to have a podcast. It was a really crappy YouTube show with Linland, and Eddie Penny was our guest. And so he's very gracious. He came down, and I was just happy to be a fly on the wall to listen to the 2 of those guys. So Eddie and him were talking about the same thing. He was asking Matt, what's it like when you go into the ring, to fight in front of Putin or something? And Matt was like, listen to Eddie talk about like, what's it like when the back door of the helicopter comes down and you're out and it's go time, right? On a mission or something. And it was so funny to see the totally different worlds completely match between the 2 of them, because Matt's answer to Eddie was like, when I heard that pin drop in the door of the octagon and I knew that it was locked. They were talking about this fear, right? Matt's like, his answer, he's like, I knew they couldn't escape. And Eddie's like, yeah, that's how I felt leaving the helicopter. He's like you weren't scared at all at that point. He's like, once that switch is flipped, you're not scared of what happens to you. You know that they can't get away from you now.
That's right.
And that is a warrior's mindset.
That's right. That's right. And you can through stress inoculation, you can teach that, right? That's why I say don't seek out to be fearless, because there's no such thing, but to embrace that fear and use it as the motivation that drives you forward, right?
Well, and that's why I asked about it, because when you were describing those moments of using fear through your BUDS training, with the boats on, when the people were asking, weren't you scared? You're like, well, yeah, but like that's why I think it's important with stress inoculation, you can have this little fear train. People need to build this up in their life.
That's right.
Because it gives you the tools to say, like, I know how to suffer. And if I'm going to lose something from this, I'll be okay. Like so you're going to punish me. Okay. I can handle a punishment, or I can handle the pain because I know I'm strong. I know that we can survive.
Well, you improve too. And there, just a couple months ago, some neuroscientists discovered that the suffering improves cognition, right? It improves a sense of self. It improves all of that. And I haven't read the science yet, but I'm like, well, duh. Duh. Like the resilience piece and it reinforces those neural pathways if you access the ones that get you through it, right?
So yeah, I told you I'd come back to this when you were talking about metacognition.
Yeah.
When you're saying the suffering reinforces those pathways and those resilience, I think this is a little bit anecdotally for me speaking too, and then I'll get to the science, but like, I think when you're going through that suffering, one of the mechanisms by which it accomplishes those reinforcing of the connections and whatnot is when you're suffering, you're actually you're engaging in a lot of self-talk and self-reflection, because like a lot of times you're usually suffering by yourself. So you're like talking all sorts of stuff, like how do I get out? And there's negative insurgencies in
that's right.
Right. And that's what you need to harness those negative self-talks, unleash the positive ones, and wrestle with it. Let those two horses run together to pull your cart. Right.
That's right.
So that takes practice, because that's a skill. And so as you're practiced in the skill of suffering, you're actually practicing in the skills of self-awareness, metacognition. And that's what you were describing in those, some of the, whether it was kids or recruits or colleagues, people who are overconfident and think, oh, I got this. And they don't take feedback, and they're like, no, we're good. And you're like, no, literally, like, you're not. And so I don't, forgive me if you haven't heard of this phenomenon, but there's a phenomenon in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
So I discovered the first neural correlates of it.
Are you kidding me?
No, I published it in 2021.
Are you kidding me?
No.
All right, explain it because it's one of the most phenomenal things that I've ever been exposed to.
I call it psychological gravity.
Awesome.
Why gravity? Because gravity is a physical force of nature in the world, and it affects everyone. You don't get to float around Earth. You are harnessed by gravity. You can beat gravity. You can jump, but it takes energy to beat that gravity, bring you down, and it will also bring you down too. An airplane can use energy to lift off. It takes energy to stay above gravity, but it will eventually have to come down because it's unsustainable. So when I say it's psychological gravity, it's a psychological phenomena that affects everyone like a physical law of Newtonian gravity does in the world of physics. Wow. Which is to say, I am talking to everyone, including me and you. There is no one that is not affected by this phenomena. Okay, so what's the phenomena? It is a twofold phenomena. The one part of it is that people have a tendency to overestimate their abilities or capabilities. And the other side is that people also have a tendency to underestimate their capabilities and performances. Now, the twist on it is that it tends to be, the phenomena is that the people who are the most competent and the most capable are the ones who underestimate themselves. And the people who are the most or the least competent are the ones who are the most overconfident. So in the science side of that, statistically, we call that a crossover interaction. So, and I'll unpack that as we move along here. So it's really problematic. So I reported these findings to Army Futures Command at the Association for the U.S. Army because I pitched it in the context of we can make better leaders by stopping overconfidence. And I had a picture of George Armstrong Custer on the slide. Because
perfect example.
Well, this is all fun and games and lovey-dovey psychology stuff until lives are on the line.
That's right.
And overconfidence kills.
That's
which
right.
it did. It killed everybody in his command.
That's right.
But underconfidence kills too. If you don't go forward when you should, you miss an opportunity, A, for victory, but B, to save lives that could have escaped a bombing or, whatever scenario you want to, create. So both of them are essential to master for good leadership. And I needed a good military example of how the military doesn't always have that great calibration. Custer was a great one that was so far away that nobody would feel like I was talking to them in the room. And
there's actually a wonderful book that a British psychologist wrote about British officers making horrible calls and why. The psychology it's like psychology of bad leaders or something like that.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
And so this is actually one of the things. If I wouldn't have been fired, I was writing grants and projects. I wanted to apply this actually in a leadership context, which our study was in a basic science way. It wasn't an applied way of leaders, but I'm like, this is the next step. We have to do these kind of research studies because it can be gangbusters. So what we found in our study is, and what the psychological phenomena of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that our least competent think they're the best, sort of your braggadocios. And our most competent think they're the worst. So I call them your humble heroes. So, and we see this in all tracks of life, right? If you talk to Michael Jordan, he knows he's Michael Jordan. He might be, some people might think he's arrogant, but he's just confident. He's actually a reasonably humble guy because he knows it. And if you talk to your tier 1 guys, like
all humble,
look, they're, you get them all around the bar, you guys will razz each other in quiet, but like the humbleness probably climbs as you climb that ladder.
100%. I mean, I think there's a existence within the operational community that it's like, your humility is tempered because it's happening in real time. But the guys, the really amazing operators that I know, as soon as they separate from that world, unbelievably humble in terms of
just to take it back to the guy you mentioned, Colonel Charlie Plum, one of the things that was incredible for me was his humility about his whole scenario. And he made a comment in a show that we did together during COVID about isolation and confinement. And I was very deferential because he's like, well, you've done some time too. I'm like, I did a few weeks. Like, I'm not going to sit here with you and talk about doing time. But
he's amazing.
But he said, no. He's like, you don't understand, Rick. Like, time, if you did one day, time is time. And he said that he understood that everybody has their own Hanoi Hilton. Everybody has their own prison. We're not operating all at the same level. So he had such a large cup of water that could hold so much fluid that it took 4 years to fill. But somebody else, he's like, you might be in an abusive relationship at home.
That's right.
That is the same prison and the same resilience that you're building.
Genius,
and he could understand that with the humility rather than being like, well, I did this. And he isn't, as you know, he's not that guy.
No.
And so with Dunning-Kruger, you have this famous phenomena. It's captured in biblical scripture. Confucius, Shakespeare famously said, the fool thinks he's wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. And I was just back from the NASA astronaut interview process in 2016. And it was reasonable that I could have been picked up because I just interviewed in the finals for it. Fortunately, I had to go up against Johnny Kim and Frank Rubio, and they beat me pretty good.
Those are two very healthy competitors. Yeah.
I went home to my university job and I said, I probably won't be able to run any more scientific studies anymore. Like, what would I run again? And 1 year to run whatever study you can do. And I had a student who came and actually demonstrated this effect. She was complaining about some grades she got in a test, but she's like, but I've always just gotten A's in all my papers. I'm like, well, here's why you got an F. Like, here's the reasons it didn't connect. She was overconfident because she didn't have the skills to know the areas that were failing short. And so I said, I wonder what the brain activity is associated with this. And I went and I looked at, and it turns out there weren't any studies of these phenomena.
Wow.
And so I designed one because I'm like, this may be, I could never do another science. I'll just be a lab rat for NASA the rest of my life.
Right.
Possibly. And so let's do it. And I didn't ask for any like research funding. I didn't get bogged down in the bureaucracy. We ended up getting funding later for it. But it took a long time of being told no. We just did it. It was a beautiful, badass part of science. We just did it. And so we built a study. It was a memory study. And we'd ask people every 10 trials of their memory decisions to say, how well do you think you're performing compared to everyone? And so we replicated that crossover finding. So the best performers said they were performing not so great, and vice versa. The people performing the worst on the memory test thought they were doing great.
Yep.
But what was really interesting was two patterns of results. One was behavioral response times, and the other was the brain activity. First, the behavioral response times, how fast people respond to those judgments. You mimic the exact same crossover pattern of results. So the people who are your humble heroes, they were slowest in speed to press the button to say, I'm doing the best. They were also fastest to say, I'm doing the worst. And your braggadocios, the people who had the illusion of being better, they were fastest to say, I'm the greatest. And slowest to say, I'm the worst. They were the worst.
Wow.
And I mean, that tracks. And anybody who has worked like you have with high-performing people,
right.
You've also, it's exactly how you see things manifest.
That's what you focus on, that evaluation. And that's how you begin to break the individual down or build them up, is in that space, in that crossover. That's what I look for.
Yeah. So the problem that we've had psychologically is we've known about this phenomena for decades.
Yep.
And they've come up with theories to explain why. And we reasoned in reading the literature that the theoretical accounts for it were garbage, because all they came up with was the account of it being, they called reach around knowledge, that you have some knowledge and it's allowing you to reach around to some guess that you're going to do. Or they said basically blissful ignorance, like you don't know, so you're blissfully overconfident. To me, that's not a well designed and empirically strong construct of a psychological construct. That just doesn't, to me, that was flimsy and weak. So we recorded brain activity of these judgments, and we found two patterns of effects. We actually found different brain activity for these different judgments of the people doing these things. And what we found was a pattern of activity in the overestimators, the people who are braggadocios, people, who think they're great, and aren't. That pattern of activity was very frontal in the brain. It was very kind of what we call early in time. So when the stimulus and the judgment happens, it happened very fast, close to that judgment, about 400 milliseconds.
Wow.
And what was interesting
fast.
What was interesting about that pattern of brain activity is it's the same pattern of brain activity that we see when people are in memory studies and are using a kind of memory we call familiarity, which I mentioned because your earlier comment made me kind of put a tack in returning to this, because it's the using of our just intuition. They're just kind of feeling that they're remembering something that they're not. They're not performing as well, but they think they are. And so how are they arriving at this judgment? It's because their decision is governed by the sense that this information just seems familiar. Okay. But how are the best performers actually constraining themselves and holding themselves back actually, and saying, well, actually they're not accurate, but they're saying they're underperforming. They didn't show that pattern of activity. They showed a pattern in the back left parietal area of the brain later in time, about 600 and 900 milliseconds.
Why in the parietal region?
Well, why is a deep question. I'm not sure I know the exact answer, but what I can tell you is that pattern of activity is the same pattern of activity that we see typically in memory studies when they use a different kind of memory process called recollection. Recollection is a clear, distinctive retrieval of the context woven together with the information from the past. That is, you know the details. You know, you can remember everything about it. It doesn't just seem fuzzy. Oh, I think I know you from somewhere, don't I? You seem very familiar. Instead,
this place, this time, this was the
exactly.
Okay.
And so, very different kind of memory. Those people are humble heroes. Were making their judgments and performance based upon that kind of a brain process, which told us a couple things. It told us that they were constraining their judgments and estimations of their own performance relative to others with clear details and specificity, versus people were jumping to these wild conclusions of being great because it was actually fuzzy. And so they were using this intuition without facts, without information.
Wow.
And it was leading them down the primrose path of thinking they were better than they were. And we kind of took the next leap of saying, we presumed that they probably encoded the information differently. That is to say, like in real world applications, probably when you study better and you know the material better,
preparation,
you're going to remember the details.
Yep.
Those details are also going to constrain you towards getting out too far in front of your skis, because you're also going to know the information well enough to where you also know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so you're like,
and you're honest about it.
Well, in this case, they were falsely honest, like that, right?
The people that thought they were better than they were.
No, those people were not honest about it.
The people that were restrictive in their assessment of their capability, they actually lowered.
Yeah.
They weren't honest about how good they were.
Yeah.
Was it a protective? Is it a protective?
I think it was just, I mean, like anything, when you know what you don't know.
Or is it humility? Is it part of those moral boundaries, right?
Kind of, I mean, I think it's like the Socratic method, Socrates, right? He knows when you know what you don't know, it's only because you studied and you put the work in. You went to, you took the long journey in life. Like you put the work in.
Oh my God.
And you went through SQT. You did you now know who you are. Or maybe you don't until after combat, but like you put the work in your journey to where now you have the constraint to realize Socratically, there's a lot I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but that's only because you know so much. Yeah. So the people who are our braggadocios, they hadn't gone on that metaphorical journey. I would say that they probably didn't encode the information well enough. And so it allows them to just use their intuition to falsely jump to conclusions and erroneously think they're better than they are. Now you can see where I applied this towards the military leadership side.
That's right.
When I talked to the Army Futures Command, I was like, I think you want your leaders to be constrained and not to be the ones who maybe who are making decisions out of intuition because they think it feels right because maybe they didn't study as well.
How do you teach constraint or restraint? It's not constraint, it's restraint, right?
A little bit of both. I mean, you're constraining your decisions based upon details, facts, and information based on experience. I would say broadly, I mean, it's probably the answer to this whole conversation, which is like experience and discernment and wrestling in the gray teaches that, right? Loss, right? Aiming at that target on the target field. Trial and error, but you also have the guide. You can teach someone to shoot a whole lot better if you just take them out of training and say, do what I tell you to do. I'm going to teach you, and listen to what I'm teaching you. You have to actually, submission. You have to be coachable and be responsive and accepting to feedback of what you're right and wrong about, and just do what I'm telling you to do. When you get kids like that, like from grassroots levels to the Olympic Training Center, like those are the coach's dreams, because you save so much time. You just do the thing. And so when we found those patterns of brain activity, that's kind of what we deduced, is that this Dunning-Kruger phenomena is based upon people using these wrong mental processes because both of them are illusions. And everybody talks about the Dunning-Kruger effect. For a while, people bashed Trump for it, but because he just seems like this, it's great, it's huge. The whole braggadocio stereotype of anybody overconfident. Some people might say a lot of SEALs.
No, it's fact.
But just think of any stereotype of overconfident people.
Yep.
When that story broke about 5 years ago on that finding, I always told people in shows and smaller, interviews about it. I said, I think the biggest take home from that isn't that. It's that in a leadership sense, society is held back by our best people underestimating themselves.
Oh,
They're not running. They think somebody else is better is going to run for office. They think somebody else probably knows more. Like, you know, like, so let's just say I'm just a knuckle dragging wrestler at the end of the day, right? Like I was a bar back and a landscaper and a bar fighter and a wrestler. Like somebody else probably figure this guy's running for office or leadership for this or that
is better.
He probably knows more about it. No, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't. We now know this for a fact. Thank heavens for the internet. It's a double-edged weapon, but man, is it revealed people for what they are Truly and what they aren't. And now we know as leaders in society that we need to step up and we need others to step up. But when you're wrestling with those demons of doubt, the negative insurgency that you refer to, those should be learned through practice to be comfortable areas because it means you're on that Socratic path.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have those demons of doubt, you're going to make that overestimating error. You're going to think you're great. You're going to think you're fine. You don't have those butterflies before a match, you're about to get knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
That's learning how to harness that negative insurgency to make properly calibrated estimations and to put your hat in the ring and take command and control and lead your family, your township, your community, your country forward, because we need the best people to stop thinking that they're not good and somebody else is better out there. I promise you they're not. It's the actual science. It's the actual data. And I was just fired from it, so we can't do more work on it. But,
well, my goal now is to figure out how to get you into a place that you can continue this work. Rick, I'm I thought we'd go for an hour. We've gone for 3. Yeah. It felt it felt like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So I can't thank you enough for your time. Your courage is admirable beyond measure, but it's your wisdom and your drive. And man, I'm going to start praying that something's coming your way. All of this is for a reason. And I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Well, it's my honor. I can't thank you enough for having me on. And like I said, there's been parts in my journey where I was wrestling with a negative insurgency and negative thoughts. And I saw what you were doing, evangelizing on the internet and giving good messages, legitimately good things that have helped give me the strength to get here and many others too. So, I mean,
I appreciate that.
You're the man.
How can people follow you, get in contact? Where can they see your work? Just share a little bit of that with people.
Yeah. So, my work scientifically is on PubMed. Everything is publicly, freely accessible. They're kind of nerdy technical papers. Nobody tends to want to read them that much, but I had to start. So basically I've always been in the shadows and quiet and tried to be essentially a quiet professional. I've never really done anything publicly outside of science and NASA interviews and stuff, but I had to make a decision that we need to lean into this and reveal the truth for what it is. So now I started a Twitter account at Rick Addante. I have a Substack, which is Addante, Substack/Addante. So they can subscribe, freer subscriber models. Twitter, of course, I'm there. And I have a Give, Send, Go account. The title of it is The Truth Is Not For Sale. The website is some weird numbers. I forget what it is.
Yeah.
It's like just random website, but The Truth Is Not For Sale.
And they type your name in, Truth Is Not For Sale, and that'll pop up. On
Give, Send, Go, that'll pop up.
Okay.
I would have had a better website name for it, but when I created it, I had never done it before, and I didn't.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Worked like that.
Yeah,
so
you're good.
But we're grateful, and we're grateful for you. We're grateful for people who have been supportive. James, of course, has been a godsend, but so has everybody. I mean, people have given $20, $5, it all matters.
Yep.
And it truly warms our heart and touches it because, when we turn down that money, we don't think any money is worth a lot.
No.
And, we figured that, we wanted to aim to raise the same amount of money, but $1 more, just to show that the truth is worth $1 more than a lie. If not, they win in that respect. They'll never win. But at a message level, that was something that was important to us because we do feel that there is no price on the truth. If they're offering you $1, it's probably not a truth that matters, so you don't need to take it.
That's right.
If they're offering you $1 trillion, it's probably especially the kind of truth that needs to come out.
Amen. Rick, thank you.
Yeah.